people say next month, not next year. Let's commit today together to create a just and sustainable future for people and planet.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
Obrigada a todos por se tornarem líderes em clima e justiça.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
जलवायु और न्याय पर वर्ल्ड वाइड टीचिंग में आप सभी का स्वागत है।
Welcome to the worldwide teach-in on climate and justice.
Bienvenue à la conférence mondiale éducative sur le climat et la justice.
Bem-vindo ao encontro participativo global sobre clima e justiça.
Today, we are coming together globally to share our concern for the climate crisis, for climate justice, and to find solutions. We understand that carbon pollution is causing the planet to heat up. We see the fires and floods, the droughts and crop failures. This teach-in will help us all move from despair about this to determination together to change the future. Why climate and justice? Global warming is profoundly unjust. People in low-income communities are already suffering the most as the planet heats up. In the last year, tens of millions of people have been forced to leave their homes by climate change, more refugees than from conflict and violence combined. We can stop this. We can stabilize the climate, and in doing so, create jobs and opportunities for all in a new green economy. What will it take? Our hard work and the courage to face it.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Climate change, it's pretty close to home for South Carolina.
From the UK's wettest February on record to raging wildfires in California.
These winds die down. This fire is unstoppable.
Ferocious fires scorch terrain as Earth
Water
heats.
shortage is forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
It can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave us alone in a world of concrete and plastic.
Groom Gaia into a vacant void.
It will take the green and leave us in the dark.
I'm afraid it will bring out the worst in people.
Uprooting our families and communities.
Leaving our children to an irreversible nightmare.
Taking the beauty of each season from us.
Causing untold suffering that could have been prevented.
I am afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. What are we being taught?
What are they teaching us?
Economics, literature, math, engineering, history, music.
What meaning do they hold if our climate swallows us whole?
I can be courageous.
I can be courageous.
I can use my voice and passion, keep fighting even on the days it feels hopeless.
I can fight for my people.
I can hold on to the beauty we still have.
I can save our land against this man-made havoc.
I can be a voice for the sky, the soil, and the sea.
I can make a good future for our next generation.
I can stand up even when it feels easier to sit down.
I can love my brothers and sisters and protect their lives, because we have the same mother, the great Mother Earth.
I can be louder than polluters that try to silence life.
I can do my part and lead others around me to do better.
I can ask my teacher to make climate.
I can ask my teacher
to make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
At your teach-in, you've discussed concrete actions you can move forward in your community. Time is short, for climate injustice. Help others move from climate despair to climate action. As the young people say now, not next month, not next year. Let's commit today, together, to create a just and sustainable future for people and planet.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
Obrigada a todos por se tornarem líderes em clima e justiça.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
जलवायु और न्याय पर वर्ल्ड वाइड टीचिंग में आप सभी का स्वागत है।
Welcome to the worldwide teach-in on climate and justice.
Bienvenue à la conférence mondiale éducative sur le climat et la justice.
Bem-vindo ao encontro participativo global sobre clima e justiça.
Today, we are coming together globally to share our concern for the climate crisis, for climate justice, and to find solutions. We understand that carbon pollution is causing the planet to heat up. We see the fires and floods, the droughts and crop failures. This teach-in will help us all move from despair about this to determination together to change the future. Why climate injustice? Global warming is profoundly unjust. People in low-income communities are already suffering the most as the planet heats up. In the last year, tens of millions of people have been forced to leave their homes by climate change, more refugees than from conflict and violence combined. We can stop this. We can stabilize the climate, and in doing so, create jobs and opportunities for all in a new green economy. What will it take? Our hard work and the courage to face it.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Climate change, it's pretty close to home for South Carolinians.
From the
city
UK's
of
wettest
Charleston
February on record to raging wildfires in California.
These winds die down. This fire is unstoppable.
Ferocious fires scorch terrain as earth
Water
heats.
shortages forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
I can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave us alone in a world of concrete and plastic.
Groom Gaia into a vacant void.
It will take the green and leave us in the dark.
I'm afraid it will bring out the worst in people.
Uprooting our families and communities.
Leaving our children to an irreversible nightmare.
Taking the beauty of each season from us.
Causing untold suffering that could have been prevented.
I am afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. What are we being taught?
What are they teaching us?
Economics, literature, math, engineering, history, music.
What meaning do they hold if our climate swallows us whole?
I can be courageous.
I can be courageous.
I can use my voice and passion, keep fighting even on the days it feels hopeless.
I can fight for my people.
I can hold on to the beauty we still have.
I can save our land against this man-made havoc.
I can be a voice for the sky, the soil, and the sea.
I can make a good future for our next generation.
I can stand up, even when it feels easier to sit down.
I can love my brothers and sisters and protect their lives, because we have the same mother, the great Mother Earth.
I can be louder than polluters that try to silence life.
I can do my part and lift others around me to do better.
I can ask my teacher to make climate.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
Make
I can
climate
ask
a
my
class.
teacher to make climate a class. Make climate a class.
At your teach-in, You've discussed concrete actions you can move forward in your community. Time is short for climate injustice. Help others move from climate despair to climate action. As the young people say, now, not next month, not next year. Let's commit today together to create a just and sustainable future for people and planet.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
Obrigada a todos por se tornarem líderes em clima e justiça.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
जलवायु और न्याय पर वर्ल्ड वाइड टीचिंग में आप सभी का स्वागत है।
Welcome to the worldwide teach-in on climate and justice.
Bienvenue à la conférence mondiale éducative sur le climat et la justice.
Bem-vindo ao encontro participativo global sobre clima e justiça.
Today, we are coming together globally to share our concern for the climate crisis, for climate justice, and to find solutions. We understand that carbon pollution is causing the planet to heat up. We see the fires and floods, the droughts and crop failures. This teach-in will help us all move from despair about this to determination together to change the future. Why climate injustice? Global warming is profoundly unjust. People in low-income communities are already suffering the most as the planet heats up. In the last year, tens of millions of people have been forced to leave their homes by climate change, more refugees than from conflict and violence combined. We can stop this. We can stabilize the climate, and in doing so, create jobs and opportunities for all in a new green economy. What will it take? Our hard work and the courage to face it.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Climate change hits pretty close to home for South Carolina.
From the
city
UK's
of
wettest
Charleston
February on
flooded
record to raging wildfires in
These
California.
winds die down. This fire is unstoppable.
Page, ferocious fires, scorched terrain as earth
Water
heats.
shortages forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
It can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave us alone in a world of concrete and plastic.
Groom Gaia into a vacant void.
It will take the green and leave us in the dark.
I'm afraid it will bring out the worst in people.
Uprooting our families and communities.
Leaving our children to an irreversible nightmare.
Taking the beauty of each season from us.
Causing untold suffering that could have been prevented.
I am afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. What are we being taught?
What are they teaching us?
Economics, literature, math, engineering, history, music.
What meaning do they hold if our climate swallows us whole?
I can be courageous.
I can be courageous.
I can use my voice and passion, keep fighting even on the days it feels hopeless.
I can fight for my people.
I can hold on to the beauty we still have.
I can save our land against this man-made havoc.
I can be a voice for the sky, the soil, and the sea.
I can make a good future for our next generation.
I can stand up, even when it feels easier to sit down.
I can love my brothers and sisters and protect their lives, because we have the same mother, the great Mother Earth.
I can be louder than polluters that try to silence life.
I can do my part and lift others around me to do better.
I can ask my teacher to make climate.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
At your teach-in, you've discussed concrete actions you can move forward in your community. Time is short for climate injustice. Help others move from climate despair to climate action. As the young people say, now, not next month, not next year. Let's commit today together to create a just and sustainable future for people and planet.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
Obrigada a todos por se tornarem líderes em clima e justiça.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
जलवायु और न्याय पर वर्ल्ड वाइड टीचिंग में आप सभी का स्वागत है।
Welcome to the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice.
Bienvenue à la conférence mondiale éducative sur le climat et la justice.
Bem-vindo ao encontro participativo global sobre clima e justiça.
Today, we are coming together globally to share our concern for the climate crisis, for climate justice, and to find solutions. We understand that carbon pollution is causing the planet to heat up. We see the fires and floods, the droughts and crop failures. This teach-in will help us all move from despair about this to determination together to change the future. Why climate injustice? Global warming is profoundly unjust. People in low-income communities are already suffering the most as the planet heats up. In the last year, tens of millions of people have been forced to leave their homes by climate change, more refugees than from conflict and violence combined. We can stop this. We can stabilize the climate, and in doing so, create jobs and opportunities for all in a new green economy. What will it take? Our hard work and the courage to face it.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Climate change, it's pretty close to home for South Carolina.
From the
city
UK's
of
wettest
Charleston
February
flooded
on record to raging wildfires in
These
California.
winds died down. This fire is unstoppable.
Ferocious fires scorch terrain as Earth
Water
heats.
shortages forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
It can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar as we are all attending. So welcome to this webinar focus on Africa going all together, working with the contribution of 8 speakers today. And for showing our workshop that we started yesterday. Some recommendations to ease our work today. 1 and 2. And also to clear understanding of our French speakers attendants. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue sur le webinaire régional sur la justice climatique. Ce matin, nous allons suivre hier soir, hier matin. Alors, à l'attention de quelques membres sur les webinaires. Première chose, les interventions de nos speakers, de nos orateurs vont être en direct, alors enregistrés, en différé. Deuxième élément, pour toute question, il faudrait les laisser dans la boîte à dialogue à la rubrique questions-réponses. avec votre nom, votre organisation et votre boîte email. Now, I would like to introduce here ANYL4PSD coordinators, Mr. Patrick Maloum, for the opening remark of this talk. Mr. Maloum, please, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on your time zone. It is such a great pleasure to speak as well on behalf of ANYL4PSD, African Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development, as part of the second day of our regional teaching event on climate change. Yesterday, we had a critical number of speakers who have edified us on all the environment, all the components, all the pictures concerning the issue of climate, the problem of climate justice. And it is then up to us to take action in order to help our governments, our community, to champion for climate restoration, climate resilience, and this is our responsibility. So today, we are going to end with our regional teaching, but this does not mean that you have to stay quiet. You as leader, even after this event, you have to continue to take action. You have to take action in your community to engage more stakeholders for climate justice, for climate restoration. Don't forget, we are going to display the present sheet at any moment. You have to fill it out properly to ensure that you will receive a certificate. Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour, bonsoir ou bon après-midi, en fonction de là où vous vous trouvez. C'est toujours un plaisir d'introduire ces propos au nom de African Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development. Hier, nous avons eu une session assez informative qui a vu se succéder des panélistes avec des propositions, avec des réflexions très enrichissantes qui nous permettent de davantage prendre conscience et surtout de passer à l'action afin d'aider nos gouvernants, afin d'aider nos communautés, de prendre à développer des gouvernances adéquates, des gouvernances personnalisées pour résoudre la problématique du changement climatique, pour résoudre la problématique de la justice climatique et aussi pour définir justement les piliers importants pour la résilience climatique. C'est ainsi donc que nous vous appelons, même après ce webinaire qui va s'achever aujourd'hui, de continuer à prendre des actions, vous, en tant qu'acteurs de la société civile. Alors, un espace a déjà été aménagé pour cela. Il s'agit du nouveau cadre pour la nature et les personnes qui est conduit par la plateforme African Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development. Cette plateforme, ce cadre est un espace adéquat puisqu'il rassemble les OSC, il rassemble les parties prenantes de toute l'Afrique et même hors de l'Afrique afin de développer une action concertée pour pouvoir ensemble jeter les fondements d'une justice saine, d'un climat sain, autant pour moi, un climat sain et profitable pour notre continent. À tout moment, la liste de présence va circuler. Nous vous invitons donc justement à rester connectés activement et vous rassurer que vos noms sont proprement écrits sur la liste de présence. Cela nous permettra justement d'avoir le certificat qui est une preuve irréfutable de votre engagement en tant qu'acteur de la société civile pour la cause climatique. Donc, sur ce, il ne me reste plus qu'à vous souhaiter un très bon moment en notre compagnie et nous nous reverrons certainement à la fin pour un mot de conclusion. So now I would like just to wish to all of you guys a wonderful stay. Enjoy your presence among us and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your intervention for this opening remark. Then we are going quickly, very quick this morning. And I want to call here Madam Nzime Regina Muriza from Zimbabwe. She belongs to the organization Start International, EPIC, and she's going to afford the theme partnerships in community-led urban sustainability and ecosystem restoration. Good morning, Zima.
Good morning, and thank you very much for that introduction. And hello, everyone. Welcome to this section of the program, where I'm going to talk about the education partnerships for innovation in communities, acronymed EPIC. So I'm having problems sharing my screen. Can I ask that the organizers do that on my behalf? So that we don't waste time, I'll go ahead. As introduced, my name is Nzime Muriza, and I am the EPIC coordinator for the African region. So the EPIC model stands for Education Partnerships in or for Innovation in Communities, EPIC. And the question you might be asking is, what is EPIC, or how does EPIC work? Thank you very much. Please, let's go to slide 3. So EPIC is essentially a network, and I'll draw parallels between the African youth organization that has brought us together here, as well as EPIC, because there are a lot of similarities between what we do within EPIC and what you do. So EPIC is a network. It also works in different regions, including Africa. It is an international network, and it really concentrates on a partnership. So it's a partnership between universities, cities, and in this case, the partners in the cities are the local governments, that is the councils or the municipalities. And then the third partner are communities, the people on the ground in the cities. So it's 3 partners, and the glue that really holds those 3 partners are students. So the EPIC model is very relevant to you as students, as youth, and we'll talk about a radically simple question that we pose as EPIC. And the question is, what if we could connect existing university instructors with existing courses for existing local projects? But the key word here is the scale, because universities are already working on courses, they're already working on projects and research, and some universities are already working with communities. But we want to upscale the impact. So EPIC is about that scale and to magnify value for all. So it's about a win-win solution. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so how does EPIC work? I talked about the 3 partners. From the city or community side, this is how it all plays out. The city has to first identify a leader who can drive processes that will make sure that the EPIC project works. And we normally call this a coordinator. And what it does is it's normally a staff member within that organization who makes it easy or coordinates all the activities and people around them. This staff member identifies the projects as well as the goals within existing work plans. I want you to zero in on that, existing work plans. Remember, we talked about existing projects, existing structures. Now, if the project is now matched, that staff member or coordinator is only involved during class term. Why is this important? Remember, I said EPIC works with students. So it's only when students are on campus or when classes are open or when the semester is running that the EPIC project runs. And then this coordinator also identifies additional stakeholders to be involved. And so in terms of matching, this could be departments within the city, this could be community-based organizations and so forth, which will ensure that working with them will make the EPIC project work. So on the right hand, it just shows a picture there in terms of First of all these partners identify priorities or needs of cities. And I'm sure even from yesterday, we've been talking about some of the issues or problems within our society and communities. And then the coordinator works with community partners, uses city resources or existing resources. And all of this is coordinated by the EPIC city or community coordinator. Let's move on to the next slide. So likewise, on the university side, there is also a coordinator, and this coordinator plays the same role as we were talking about within the city or community. The only difference is that at universities, as you will know, we have different structures. So in this case, that coordinator will identify instructors. And at the universities, these are lecturers, tutors, they can even be administrative staff, as long as they are able to work together and also make sure that students are part of this project. So how does it all work out? That coordinator, after they know what the issue or the problem or the gap that the city wants to address, once they know that, they can easily identify courses and their relevant lecturers, and then start working with students, so that those students can work with the city, can work with the community in fostering solutions. And what's important for us to note here is EPIC really capitalizes on students or youth or young people, young at heart like me, okay? Because we are saying that youth and students really have energy, they have innovation, they are not shy. But most of the time, universities are ivory towers. They do research, but sometimes they don't work with communities, or they don't really have the reality on the ground. Some of the courses that are being offered at universities are very theory-based. So once the students and the instructors work within the EPIC project, the students then gain practical, hands-on knowledge or real world challenges. They understand how those challenges work and some of the solutions. So it's a win-win situation where the problems to do with the city are being solved. The university makes sure that their students are equipped practical wise, but also that there's this partnership, and the communities which are living in those areas where the issues or the problems are being addressed also win in that solutions are brought to their communities. Let's move on. The next slide. So I want to draw parallels, as I said, between the African Network of Youth Leaders and EPIC. And I've just highlighted in this slide in bold font or text some of the things that are similar between your network and EPIC, and working across Africa and other regions, climate justice. We work with communities and make sure that we're working with them and not for them, such that they are part of the solutions when it comes to climate related problems. We also work with biodiversity conservation and restoration. And I will talk about an example from Africa that zeroes in on this theme. We also work around ensuring that natural resources are sustainably managed or utilized. And then we also do positive ecological and socio-economical transformation for communities. Last but not least, we also work on SDGs. The particular example I'm going to talk about zeroes in on water. Let's move to the next slide. So as I'm still drawing parallels, EPIC, as you will see in the next slide, works, it's an international network, but it also works in Africa, just like your network. And then the partnerships that I was talking about, which involve the university, the government, and the communities. And then the SDGs, as mentioned before. The mantra of EPIC is all about using existing resources, but also sustainably managing them. And this is very important if the project and the work that is being done is to be sustainable. Otherwise, relying on external funding, as you may know, sometimes is not sustainable, and the impact also is not long lasting. The last 2 points that I've highlighted in red, again, as I keep on repeating, EPIC mainly works with students, and it works with existing courses, existing faculties. So it's not about creating new things or disrupting existing structures and so forth. Again, working with students or working with young people, make sure that we harness innovation, we harness energy. Sometimes students have all these solutions and ideas, and they don't know who to go to, who to work with, and where to practice those ideas. So EPIC gives them that chance. But also, I just want to reiterate that it's not just the students going out and working with communities or having fun, like a field-based excursion, but the work that they do in EPIC is actually credited to their coursework. So it's really official, and it's really about making sure that the students get involved and participate. And then, of course, the whole idea is to create win-win solutions through these partnerships. Let's move on to the next slide. So now I'm going to talk about an example from Africa, and in particular, the city of Durban. You can skip this. I think the next couple of 2 slides, you can skip this as well, sorry. And in Durban, South Africa, the EPIC model, as we move on to the next slide, the EPIC model concentrated on the city of Durban. Please go back, sorry. If gone too far, we want to start with challenge 1. So the EPIC model worked with students from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, which is in Durban, and they worked within an informal community, which had for a very long time faced this issue of chronic solid waste, as well as flooding issues. Many of you may have seen in the news in April where Durban was hit with devastating floods. And I'll show how this particular EPIC project in Durban contributed towards solutions, resilience, and sustenance within the city. So as part of the first EPIC project within the city, the students were called upon, firstly, to assess the situation, that is the waste and the flood issues in the community, Palmiate community, and then to make recommendations to the city in terms of options that could be implemented and managed in adapting to the frequent flooding events, as well as building resilience. We can move to the next slide. So how did they do this? First of all, they mapped resources or sources and the type of waste, as well as the points of discharge. They also managed to geo-reference the dwellings within the informal community, and also to identify the flood-prone areas within the community. They then submitted this assessment together with a policy brief to the city and communities. And guess what? These findings and the recommendations were actually taken up and implemented by the city. Not only did they do this, but the city actually contributed an amount of $350,000 towards the recommendations and the solutions that they made. What else did they do in terms of methodology? The students interviewed community leaders within the Palmiate informal settlement. And then they decided, all right, let's start with the pilot project. And in this project, the solutions were, first of all, to sort out, to collect waste, to sort it. And then they also arranged that the city then has scheduled pickups to take the waste, which was something that was not there before the EPIC project. They also worked with community leaders to clean up and to also proffer ways to manage the waste, and most importantly, to help restore ecosystems along the banks of that flood-prone river in the Palmiate. Let's move on to the next slide. And then, together with the policy brief that they had submitted to the city, these students managed to develop a disaster management plan, as well as a disaster evacuation system. And this was also that they could reduce the occurrence and impacts of those frequent as well as devastating floods in the area. I'll tell you that when they did this last month, when those devastating floods hit Durban, because they had put that management plan in place, the disaster management plan in place, they were able to also communicate with that community. And all of them were able to be evacuated safely. So there were no deaths within this community. And the amazing thing is that these plans and their implementation were the very first of their kind in the city as well as in the community. And I talked about how the city also contributed with that amount of money, and also the ecosystem restoration. So in terms of the ecosystem restoration, this activity involved unblocking the waste field drainages so that they could render that area resilient to floods. Let's move on. So that was the first case, and it was a pilot study. Let's move to the next slide, please. And it was very successful. So what the city then decided to do was to upscale the EPIC model. Instead of working with just one community, one university, and students from those universities, they then had this very ambitious effort to take the EPIC work even further. So they worked on what is called the Transformative River Management Program, TRMP. And this was in partnerships with several universities and 6 surrounding municipal governments. This is within the Greater Durban metro region. And in that process, remember we talked about win-win solutions. The communities that they worked in actually got jobs in the process. And we'll see how not only did they get jobs, but the students ensured that those jobs were permanent. So the TRMP also worked within 18 watersheds, so it was quite big. And then 6 surrounding municipalities, as I said, and 6 additional communities living within these catchments. We can move to the next slide. So in this case, what did the students from these 6 universities do? The issue was that most of the rivers in the bays in these watersheds were already deteriorating due to floods, also due to this issue of waste, sewage discharge, industrial effluents, solid waste disposal or dumping. So the focus of that TRMP was to co-explore together with the city, communities, and universities, how to manage this waste, the sewage and so forth, but also the associated health risk. And so again, it was identified that the blockages of the natural drainage systems were the major contributor to the issues and the impacts within the watershed. Let's move on to the next slide. So what did the students do in this case? The students from the universities worked with the community leaders again within these several communities and the different municipalities. Again, by taking the best practices and the experience from the Palmiate community. So they also sorted out waste, they identified, they sorted waste, they reduced waste, and then they made sure that they will enhance resilience to floods. They also worked with ecosystem restoration, again, just making sure that they unblock the natural pathways of water. And as I mentioned before, working with the community partners and the community members, they also sought to find plausible ways of permanently supporting management jobs for communities within these watersheds. Let's move on. So in essence, these are very summarized points from those 2 Durban EPIC projects. And I've put a link there. I'm sure this presentation will be available where you can get more information around the stories and the experiences from Durban. Then in the next slide, it just shows our information as EPIC. What I want to emphasize is that everyone is welcome. Anyone can join EPIC. You may be a student at a college, university. What you can do is to talk to your instructors, to talk to your university management about joining EPIC. But in the member commons there, you can apply to become a member. You can be a member of the network. Not only do we work with the projects, but we share a lot of other information to do with events and opportunities and so forth. So feel free to join us, and all that contact information is available for you. My last slide maps out where we are working. It's an outdated map, sorry about that, because we have since added more, but there are over 50 EPIC projects around the world. And I would like to thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this brilliant presentation. So I want to let you go like that because there is a question that one of our attenders is asking to you. Yeah, then I will direct this question to you. Dear Madam, can you please tell us what's the number one challenge related to climate justice that EPIC is experiencing in Africa? And the last question is, and what is the goal to reach your organization in Africa that may bring innovation for climate justice? Yeah, what's your answer to that?
Thank you so much for those important questions. As I mentioned before, you will find that most people or most projects that are working on climate adaptation and mitigation often don't work with communities. They will work for communities. So they say they are representing people. And you know, in Africa, we are the most vulnerable continent to the impacts of climate change. So the EPIC project really makes sure that communities, people on the ground who are being affected by these issues of climate change, such as flooding, in the example that I gave, are part of the solution, but they are also their voices are being heard. It's not a top-down approach, but really a bottom-up approach of working with the people who are affected, but also making sure that resources, solutions are brought to them. And so it really speaks to this issue of climate justice, because there's a lot of money and funding out there, but oftentimes it doesn't really trickle down to the people who are most affected. And it's important for us to really make efforts, especially as youth and young people, to make sure that there's equity, there's voice equity, there's proper representation, and that the people who are most affected are part of our processes. So that's what I can say for now. And in terms of some of the issues affecting Africa in terms of climate justice, it's really this issue of equity and also representation, just being heard and just being able to participate fully. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer you got to the question. So I think Morito is satisfied with his answer. And we push you with a brief translation of this presentation into French language for our French attenders. But before, I want to call one of the speakers to get prepared for the next presentation, Mr. Edwin Koga from Kenya. If you can, because just after you are the one to push you with the presentation. Great. Now getting back to Joel. Joel, can you give us feedback
good morning.
This? Great.
Good morning, Emmanuel. Good morning, everybody. Nice to meet you again today. Bonjour à tout le monde et encore très heureux de vous avoir aujourd'hui. Je vais faire la traduction de PowerPoint, de la présentation de Zimé. Donc, Zimé, elle appartient au réseau EPIC qui évolue dans plusieurs continents, également en Afrique, notamment en Afrique du Sud. Et elle a déclaré dans son intervention, elle parle plus du modèle EPIC. Comment est-ce qu'au travers d'un modèle d'université ainsi que d'école, ils arrivent à agir pour la justice climatique. Donc, d'entrée de jeu, elle a essayé de faire une bonne synthèse d'Africa Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development, étant entendu comme un réseau panafricain travaillant à travers l'Afrique pour la justice climatique, la conservation, la restauration, la biodiversité, afin de garantir les ressources naturelles du continent soient bien gérées de manière durable, de façon à apporter des résultats écologiques positifs. Et dans le nexus ou bien l'entrelien paix, sécurité, migration. Et elle a dit que le réseau également EPIC intervient dans le même sillage et signifie éducation, partenariat pour l'innovation dans les communautés. Donc, c'est un réseau qui est constitué de partenariats universités, gouvernements, communautés et qui s'attelle également sur les objectifs de développement durable. Donc, dans sa présentation, elle s'est attelée à mettre en exergue quelques projets qui ont été mis en œuvre par le EPIC et notamment un des projets qui porte sur le projet Ville, phase 1, donc, qui a été implémenté à Durban. Donc, dans la ville de Durban, la communauté informelle de Palmite a une longue, d'après ce qu'elle a dit, une longue histoire des problèmes chroniques de déchets solides, d'inondations. La ville souhaitait explorer des options pour résoudre ces problèmes. Et donc, dans le cadre de l'accompagnement qu'ils ont, les étudiants ont été appelés à analyser et évaluer les projets de déchets et d'inondation dans la communauté palmite et à faire des recommandations dans la ville sur les options pour améliorer la gestion des déchets ainsi que les options pour s'adapter et renforcer la résilience la résilience à l'égard face aux inondations. Et les principaux résultats pour cette phase 1 d'intervention dans cette ville de Durban, ça a été que les étudiants ont cartographié les sources et les types de déchets solides et les rejets de déchets, l'emplacement des habitations et les zones qui sont sujettes aux inondations au sein de la communauté informelle des Palmites. Et ils ont soumis également une évaluation, une note d'orientation à la ville et à la communauté sur les conclusions et les recommandations de cette étude. Deuxièmement, comme deuxième résultat de ce travail avec les étudiants, donc, grâce à des entretiens et avec les membres de communauté, les étudiants ont pu guider la ville, la communauté sur la mise en œuvre d'une politique pilote réussie de gestion de déchets dans laquelle les communautés, les membres de la communauté organisent la collecte de tri des déchets, tandis que la ville, dont la municipalité, organise des ramassages réguliers. Un troisième résultat également, c'est que les étudiants ont travaillé avec les dirigeants, les leaders communautaires, dont les chefs de quartier, pour nettoyer, identifier les moyens et gérer les déchets, et aider à restaurer les écosystèmes le long des rives dénudées, donc des rivières qui étaient sujettes aux inondations. Un autre résultat également de ce projet, c'était que les étudiants ont également travaillé avec la ville et la communauté pour développer un plan de gestion des catastrophes et un système d'alerte précoce afin de réduire la fréquence et les impacts des inondations fréquentes et souvent dévastatrices dans cette région. Donc, également, ces plans-là qui ont été développés étaient dans les premiers du genre pour la ville de Durban, c'est en Afrique du Sud, et pour la communauté palmite dans laquelle ce projet a été implémenté. Mais cependant, la ville a fourni 350 000 $ pour aider à mettre en œuvre un système d'alerte précoce face aux catastrophes à long terme et de restaurer la végétation naturelle le long des rives de l'écosystème, la rivière de cette communauté et réduire et de bien gérer les déchets. Donc, cette activité comprenait, ou bien ce projet comprenait également donc, le déblocage des drainages remplis de déchets pour aider à rendre les zones résistantes aux inondations. Et ils ont également implémenté une deuxième phase qui est dans le cadre donc, de défi, intitulé le défi de la cité. Et donc, ici, c'est toujours dans la ville de Durban. Cette ville avait souhaité explorer donc aussi les options et les approches pour mettre en œuvre un programme de gestion transformatrice et durable des rivières à l'échelle régionale en partenariat avec plusieurs universités, dont 6 municipalités environnantes dans la grande région métropole de Durban et également dans certaines villes et créer des emplois dans le processus. Dans ce programme qui constitue la deuxième phase du projet, a été un effort régional ambitieux visant à améliorer la gestion d'un communautaire dans 18 bassins versants de la grande région métropolitaine de Durban. Et le bassin versant et les 6 municipalités environnantes, dont la plupart des rivières et des baies de ces bassins versants étaient gravement détériorés en raison des inondations, des rejets fréquents des eaux usées et des affluents industriels, dont la pollution venant des entreprises et des déversements des déchets solides, dont l'objectif qu'ils avaient était de pouvoir explorer dans ces moyens pour améliorer la gestion des déchets. Donc, ici, voilà quelques résultats qui ont été produits par les étudiants. Les étudiants dont de plusieurs universités ont travaillé avec les leaders communautaires de la ville au sein du quartier informel et leurs homologues dans 6 autres bassins et dans 6 autres municipalités. Et ils ont établi une méthodologie de formation sur les meilleures pratiques pour identifier, trier et réduire les déchets et renforcer la résilience aux inondations par la gestion des déchets, le nettoyage des bassins versants naturels et la restauration des écosystèmes le long des berges des bassins versants et des déversoirs. Les étudiants ont été également invités dans le cadre de ces projets à travailler avec la municipalité de Durban et les partenaires municipaux pour identifier des moyens pour soutenir en permanence les emplois de gestion des rivières. Et donc, elle a également fait part dans son intervention que le rôle dans un modèle épique, ce genre de réseautage, c'est vraiment d'inclure les municipalités, les communautés, les universités, et que ça fonctionne à 2 niveaux principaux. Le premier niveau, c'est au niveau des communautés, dont la direction d'une ville, par exemple, où la municipalité identifie un coordonnateur, le coordonnateur va faciliter la participation d'autres membres du personnel et les membres du personnel identifient des projets objectifs dans leur plan de travail existant. Et si un projet est jumelé, le membre du personnel n'est impliqué que pendant la durée du cours et le coordonnateur et les personnels identifient également d'autres parties prenantes à impliquer. Et le deuxième niveau du modèle, c'est au niveau universitaire. L'université identifie le coordonnateur du programme et le coordinateur facilite la participation des instructeurs. Les instructeurs, ils identifient les types d'analyse ou le produit que les étudiants peuvent produire. Et si une classe est jumelée, l'instructeur n'est impliqué que pendant la durée de la classe. Le coordonnateur et l'instructeur vont identifier également des parties prenantes supplémentaires au niveau universitaire et ainsi que les données nécessaires pour la classe ainsi que pour produire des résultats. Merci.
Thank you very much, Joel, for this translation, summary translation of French for our French attenders that are attending this webinar this morning. So we are moving with another speaker. Now I want to call Mr. Edwin Koga from Kenya, members of ANYL4PSD as ambassador, and also members of Amazon Free Trades Ensemble. The theme, and it will entertain us in the theme awareness, creation, and advocacy to communities through performing art and media. Good morning, Koga.
Hello, can you get me?
Yeah, we are getting you with a beat, with a lot of noises behind you.
There's a lot of noise here.
Yeah.
Okay, let me look for where there's no noise so that you can you share with me the PDF document from your side? Because I'm using a phone and I hinted to you that my laptop is having a sound problem. Okay, so here we go. This is hello, are you getting me?
Please go ahead, Edwin.
Okay, can I go ahead? Okay, so Amazon, sorry, I was in a performance, so I had to move away. So Amazon Theatrics Ensemble are abbreviated as ATE, is a awareness creation and advocacy organization where we use performing arts and media. So Amazon Theatrics is a youth community-based organization formed in November 2011, with the main focus being talent development and cultivation. Registered with the Ministry of National Cultural Heritage, AT prioritizes art as a social tool for advocacy, embracing it as a professional platform where members could earn a living as they focus on community sensitization and empowerment through performing and visual arts in the quest of building their self-esteem and social-economic gain. We major on art genres like contemporary dance, traditional dance, modeling, fashion and design, stage theater, community theater, where we use PET. PET is a participatory educational theater, and magnet, spoken word, narrative, stand-up comedy, radio dramas, film production, and advertising, visual art production, and branding event, management and roadshow, videography, and photography. Next slide. Why performing arts? You can ask yourself that, what is the reason behind us using performing arts? So you find that performing arts and media are one of the innovative approaches we employ in our community intervention for social behavior change advocacy, since they are components of both educative and entertaining in nature, influencing mindset on how people view things, leading to change of perception and decision-making from an individual or community members. Current contemporary society like being informed in participatory manner where there is a room for their participation and giving of their views in the process. Next slide.
Okay, Adrian.
Yes. Our vision and mission.
I wanted to let you know that. Pardon?
I
was saying that it remains just only 5 minutes for your presentation.
Okay. Our vision and mission to develop programs that uses arts and media. You can read it. You see the vision. The arts and media are unique means to educate environmental tolerance and raise awareness. Next slide. Which forms of performing arts? You see, we have participate radio theater, the ones that I've mentioned behind there. Next slide. Thematic areas in climate change and environment, we have sustainable waste management and plastic pollution, wetland degradation, food insecurity, and deforestation. Next. You can see the sustainable waste management, the project that we've done, the segment problem. You can see, next slide. Okay, that's a pictorial on waste management. Next. A pictorial goes again. There's also wetland degradation. Next. Pictorial, next. Pictorial continue, World Wetland Day. Food insecurity, next slide. Pictorial, next slide. Deforestation, next slide. That is the pictorial of the deforestation, next. These are the projects that we've done. You can have a look at them. You can read at them that we've implemented in the community. Those are the artists that we work with. Next. The artist pictorial continue. Next, artistic pictorials. Artistic pictorials. Artistic pictorials. Yeah. Next. 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 Okay, the partners are there. You can have a look at them. Next. And there goes our social media handles. You can have a look at them and you can follow us and you can continue seeing what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Very short. I wasn't expecting it would be quick like that.
I'm an artist. I'm an artist, so I know how to shorten out things.
I like the way it goes. I like the way it goes. So yeah, we are going to join now for a brief transition to French English for our French attendees as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Edwin Koga, for this presentation. Merci beaucoup, Edwin, pour cette présentation. Donc, Edwin, c'est un ambassadeur pour le nouveau pacte pour la nature et les personnes et également conduit par Africa Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development. Donc, il réside au Kenya. Sa particularité et ce qui est intéressant sur lui, c'est qu'il utilise l'art pour pouvoir défendre ou promouvoir la justice climatique. Donc, selon lui, l'art de la scène et les médias font partie des approches novatrices. Nous employons généralement dans notre vie habituelle des interventions dans nos communautés pour plusieurs actions. Et est-ce qu'on peut mettre sous silence tout ce qui intervient? Donc, nous utilisons généralement l'art réutilisé pour pouvoir, ils utilisent l'art pour faire des plaidoyers en faveur du changement des comportements sociaux. Et donc, dans la société contemporaine actuelle, la société contemporaine actuelle fonctionne d'une manière participative. Et une des voies qui est la plus prisée de l'expression, c'est l'art. Et de plus en plus, on a ces différents ou ces nouveau modèle d'expression. Et son organisation Amazon Théâtrice Ensemble donne la priorité aux arts, à l'art en tant qu'outil social de plaidoyer et en adoptant donc comme une plateforme professionnelle. Ça veut dire qu'ils ont carrément totalement développé l'art comme une profession pour pouvoir reporter des plaidoyers, des actions fortes qui pourraient donc changer les vies des personnes dans les communautés au travers la sensibilisation et au travers également l'engagement ou alors le renforcement des capacités des communautés à l'autonomisation par le biais, bien évidemment, de l'art, du visuel, dans le but donc de contribuer ou de construire donc non seulement l'estime de soi pour les individus d'une communauté, mais également pour faire générer des gains socio-économiques. Et donc, ils interprètent donc dans son organisation, et avec son organisation, ils interprètent donc des genres artistiques majeurs tels que la danse contemporaine, la danse traditionnelle, la modélisation, de la mode, le designing, le théâtre sur scène, le théâtre communautaire et la parole, l'art, le récit, la comédie, également et plusieurs, le cinéma, également les publicités, la production visuelle des images, plusieurs formes, ainsi que la photographie pour pouvoir véhiculer leur message. Et donc, grâce à leur activité, ils ont pu aborder plusieurs sujets tels que les sujets de la santé et l'environnement, les sujets de la démocratie, de plus de participation des jeunes, de plus de participation des femmes dans les processus de développement, les questions de gouvernance, les questions de paix, les questions de changement climatique. Également, au travers de l'art, ils ont pu également toucher les questions liées à l'autonomisation des femmes, des filles et également les questions alimentaires, les questions même des énergies, la pollution plastique, la pénurie en eau et également la rareté des ressources. Donc, nous voyons donc au travers de son expérience qu'il n'y a pas qu'un seul moyen pour pouvoir faire la justice climatique. On peut le faire de plusieurs manières. Tous les moyens sont bons. Chacun a une compétence, chacun a un talent, mais la manière dont il peut utiliser ce talent pour la cause de la justice climatique le rendra bien évidemment innovant. Et ça, c'est une grande innovation en matière de justice climatique. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Joel, for this violent presentation, Doctor. The feedback you give to our French attenders, hope that many of them, they have got something. Alors, nous poursuivons ce webinaire avec le prochain orateur. Ouais, il s'agit d'une dame. I want to introduce here Mrs. Temitope Rebecca Adelola from Nigeria, co-founder of program and program manager, Eden Work Conservation, and also ANYL4PSD ambassador. She will entertain us on the theme experiences through Eden Work Initiative in building climate resilience of people and biodiversity.
Okay, thank you very much for the brief introduction.
Great, right. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think your presentation is already on screen, so your screen is already shared.
All right, thank you. Once again, my name is Temitope Rebecca, and I'm from Nigeria. So this morning I'll be sharing experience through Eden World Conservation Initiative, which is based in Nigeria, what we do in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in relation to food production, climate change, and biodiversity conservation. As we all know that Nigeria is one of the most populous nations in Africa, and considering that this is a country that is hit by hunger and poverty, and agriculture seems like the way out for most of our citizens. And in achieving agricultural practices as a way out of hunger and poverty, this has an effect on land use pattern, which is through illegal logging, deforestation, expansion of agricultural land to boost their income and also contribute to more food production in the country. And as a result, this has effect on ecosystem connectivity and also destroying ecological function. The truth is that most of the impacts, according to the Nigeria Determining Contribution, most of the way in which energy is being released into the atmosphere, talking about climate change, has been recognized from the energy sector. But the truth is that there are other ways in which energy is being released, which also come from deforestation. And the impact of climate change with land use pattern would limit the achievement of sustainable development. And this has also been excavated by state policies, whereby many of the state policies does not support project implementation or does not build a well laid out framework to achieve the sustainable development goals, and also strategies laid down to build resilience for climate change. Hence the reason why in 2017, Eden World Initiative came into existence by this group of young people to achieve the mission of building resilience, climate resilience among people. And our vision is salvaging the nature to meet human needs and aspirations while fulfilling the necessary ecosystem function and also ensuring sustainable environment. How do we do this? We do this through our mission, that is to reduce carbon concentration in the atmosphere through landscape restoration. We do majorly tree planting activities, then advocacy and awareness program to conserve the integrity and diversity of nature. Also, we bring modern techniques to farmers to promote climate smart agriculture that will improve farmers' yield while promoting soil health and to ensure the sustainable use of biodiversity. Lastly, we promote education in biodiversity conservation, both forest education, species education, ecosystem regreening, sustainable food production, and also advocate for good policies in this sector. And what we do, we align our goals, our vision and mission with the global goals of the CBD, the UNFCCC, and the UNCCD. And we combine all of this in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the goal 2, 6, 13, and 15. And majorly what we do is more like we're promoting human harmony with nature. We want to see a world whereby human exists and also nature exists, and they are able to build the climate resilience over time to achieve good food production, while we also have biodiversity conservation in the atmosphere. And through tree planting, we can also have build a strategy, because tree planting is one of the cheapest nature-based solutions which we have been offering in our communities, and for communities to adapt to climate resilience. And we work around the complexity of human and nature. We build advocacy for the environment around plastic recycling. We gather plastic and we partner with other organizations such as Bamboo Network, who actually deal with plastic solution as an alternative building materials for communities. And we partner with them to actually use plastic bottles to build schools for rural communities. And also we deal around ecosystem connectivity. We believe that the destruction of major forest area has actually led to the extinction of most species, and also working with farmers to build genetic pools that will connect one ecosystem to another through trees on farmland for biodiversity, which we do in communities. Also, we believe in species functionality, sustainable food production. And if we have to talk about climate change, building resilience for climate change, biodiversity conservation, we also recognize the livelihood of the people and good well-being. So how do we do all of this? We do it through education and knowledge sharing, awareness and advocacy, capacity building, and green restoration. And these are most of our pictures whereby we use innovative methods to teach our young minds in community to understand their environment better. For example, we ask them to draw possible species they feel they don't really see in their environment too often, and they would like to see it. What has been the issues why they've not been seeing it over time? What is the impact of you sitting on the tree? How do you feel? Would you like to see more trees in the environment? We try to boost their critical thinking to understand the reason for conservation and building climate resilience in their community. And also these are some of our advocacy in communities such as sawmill industry, on the streets, and among university students and secondary school students. And these are some of our activities with farmers. We work with farmers to mainstream biodiversity on agricultural landscape, which is a mainstreaming on landscape, whereby we introduce trees on farmland. And also we work with farmers to build a good policy system that will promote our food production and biodiversity conservation, and also teaching them climate smart agriculture for them to be able to have more profit, conserve biodiversity, and also have a safer environment. And these are also some of our pictures whereby we do tree planting, landscape restoration. So majorly Eden World Initiative is focused on knowledge sharing, capacity building, and green restoration to build community resilience toward climate change to achieve sustainable food production and biodiversity conservation. So what has been the challenges so far? For us, most of the projects we do with farmers, sometimes it can be lack of trust from the farmer because the government has failed them over time. A lot of project has been taken to them whereby the government did not do anything. So most time when we go as NGO, they've lost faith in us and think it's always the same thing from the government. Also lack of good policy framework to bring different ministries together. This always leads to conflict issues whereby the Ministry of Environment has another agenda to the Ministry of Agriculture. And they want to achieve the same goal, but unfortunately the framework laid down does not allow same goals to be achieved. Also lack of understanding from teachers. Sometimes when we want to train students, teachers feel that the problem of the student is beyond they understanding the effect of climate and all of that. But to achieve this, we always teach the students on how to produce food, and that way we can always get our message across to them. And another thing is poverty and hunger. Like I said earlier, most of the teachers will tell us that the students are hungry because most time we relate with the rural students who are far away from the city. And also sometimes funding opportunities because every good project needs motivation and resources. Lessons learned so far from my end is more of recognizing indigenous knowledge and involvement of the locals in decision-making, especially towards achieving success in projects. Also, the use of innovative methods for education, awareness, and advocacy. This makes it interesting. Then recognizing your strength as an organization and your weaknesses, then building partnerships to eradicate your weaknesses, and also using communication tools as a strength to showcase your work. Then don't be afraid to contact people, add mentors, build your capacity, and explore. And also be happy in building climate resilience. We believe in partnership and we are ready to work with several people and we are open for more partners. So thank you very much for your attention. I am done.
Hello. Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca, for this presentation, and it was really superb. Merci beaucoup, Rebecca, pour cette présentation. Donc, je vais faire la traduction de la présentation en anglais. Je vais essayer de faire un résumé. Donc, Temisope Rebecca elle est fondatrice, cofondatrice de Eden World et elle est également ambassadeur du nouveau pacte pour la nature et les personnes et conduit par African Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development. Et elle est une activiste très engagée au Nigeria, mais également elle travaille en Afrique du Sud. Donc, c'est quelqu'un de très valeureux sur les questions environnementales. Donc, pour elle a eu à développer, elle a eu à présenter son organisation. Son organisation travaille principalement sur les questions écosystémiques et notamment sauver la nature pour répondre aux besoins et aux aspirations humaines tout en remplissant la fonction écosystémique nécessaire en garantissant un environnement durable. Donc, elle est engagée avec son organisation à réduire la concentration de carbone dans l'atmosphère grâce à des programmes de restauration des paysages, de plaidoyer, de sensibilisation pour conserver l'intégrité et la diversité de la nature. Elle travaille également à apporter des techniques modernes aux agriculteurs pour promouvoir une agriculture intelligente face au climat et également pour améliorer les rendements des agriculteurs en favorisant donc une bonne santé pour les sols et en assurant également l'utilisation durable de la biodiversité. Et elle est également donc engagée à promouvoir l'éducation, la conservation, la biodiversité, également dans le revêtissement des écosystèmes et la production, une meilleure production durable alimentaire et également donc des actions pour faire avancer les politiques dans ces secteurs. Donc, Rebecca également, lors de sa présentation, elle a montré comment est-ce que son organisation agit implémente les 3 conventions ou bien 3 cadres des Nations Unies, notamment la Convention sur la biodiversité, sur la diversité biologique, la Convention des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques, également la Convention des Nations Unies sur la lutte contre la désertification. Et donc, son travail donc, est conforme à ces conventions, mais également donc, répond aux objectifs des conventions de Rio, mais également des objectifs de développement durable, et notamment les objectifs 2, 6, 13 et 15. Et elle travaille également, dans sa présentation, et nous démontre également comment elle travaille autour des questions complexes, les questions liées à l'homme et à la nature dans les différents secteurs tels que l'environnement, la connectivité des écosystèmes, parce que les écosystèmes sont connectés. Quand on parle d'écosystèmes, que ce soit l'écosystème aquatique, que ce soit l'écosystème, les écosystèmes aériens, terrestres, ils sont interconnectés. Et donc, il est donc important d'assurer donc une bonne fonctionnalité et équilibre entre les espèces. Et également, donc, elle est engagée donc, sur les questions alimentaires, et également des moyens de subsistance et de bien-être à travers l'éducation, le partage des connaissances, la sensibilisation, le plaidoyer, le renforcement des capacités, la restauration verte. Et elle croit au partenariat pour un monde meilleur. Merci.
Thank you very much, Joel, for this brief translation to ease the understanding of our French attenders. And we want also to forward these thanks to Mrs. Temitope Rebecca Dolela from Nigeria. Brilliant presentation. So we are going to the next presentation. Instead, on behalf of George Okwaro from Kenya, Joel will make a short presentation of this, on the theme experiences sharing how AFR 100 contributes to climate justice. Yeah, so Joel, you have the floor. I do it in French and English, please. Thank you.
Okay, please, can you display the presentation?
It seems the technical stuff is getting an issue. Yeah, an issue.
Okay, great. So I'm going to make it like that because I thought that it would be displayed. So now I'm going to.
Shortly will be solved. Just keep patient, please. But you can go ahead.
Okay, so I'm doing a presentation on behalf of George Okwaro that was not able to attend us, to be with us. So he expected to be there, but he got an issue that did not enable him to be there. So George Okwaro is a restoration associate of the World Resource Institute. So in Kenya, it is the Africa Regional Office. So the presentation is about the contribution of AFR 100 to climate resilience and adaptation. This is a project that they have implemented. So can we skip? Okay, you go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so AFR 100 Secretariat House at AODA, NEPAD, mandated to manage day-to-day operation of the initiative, 32 country focal points, and AFR 100 national chapter translating the 129 MHA committed into strategies and work plans. So the management team's intermediate government structure comprise of WRI and other partners mandated to advise and support the secretariat. So they have also 45 technical and financial partners responding to country requests for assistance to unblock barriers to the implementation. So, so Africa has the world's most degraded land. Please, can you go to the next slide? Africa has the world's most degraded land. Please, can you skip, go to the next slide? So 65% of the sub-Saharan Africa's arable land is becoming too damaged to support the robust food production. So this is, no, please go behind. 28% of all lands in sub-Saharan Africa are being actively degraded today. So costing about 56 billion annually. So this is an information from the Center for Development Research. So land degradation, we have to understand that land degradation is a global crisis, and 33% of agricultural soil are moderately to severely degraded. And a third of all the people affected by land are affected by land degradation, especially the poor. And 48% of forests lost or are degraded. So we have to understand that when we talk about forest degradation, we are talking about various issues like fragmentation of forests and also deforestation of land and also degradation of land. Because when we are talking about land degradation, it is also linked to forest degradation because the more forests are degraded or destroyed, there is an impact on the soil and the land, and we will have also impact in the productivity for many farmers. It will negatively impact the productivity of many farmers. So now degradation and climate change have several effects. They reduce agricultural productivity, just as I said. They increase also greenhouse gases. Increase, we have also due to, please go back to the slide you just left. They increase also the chances of natural disasters and landslides, and they alter also the macroclimate, and produce also loss of biodiversity and reduce also the coping ability and the resilience of community. So, and increase also the vulnerability of several communities. So there are a lot of, when we talk about the restoration, we are talking about several benefits. The more we engage in restoration, we can sequester carbon. We can also contribute to clean water. We can also participate to ecosystem to the restoration through ecotourism, and also the more we contribute to the restoration of land and also the restoration of forests, we are going also to have an increase in the nutrition, and also we can also be committed to toward sustainable land management by so it can also produce a green job. Sorry, I got I was disconnected. So the restoration on the climate action. So when we talk about restoration, we are talking about also a resilience aspect of restoration. So the benefits are increased productivity, and also the regulate water flows and streams and ocean tides, and amelioration of air. And the more we are committed in the restoration, we can also see the biodiversity increasing. So it is important for us to involve in adaptation, and by, for instance, restoring pastured land, and that will contribute to reduce conflicts, because you know that in several communities, we usually have conflicts among communities of shepherds and also communities of farmers. So the more we engage ourselves in restoration of land, these kind of conflicts are going to reduce. And we'll also have diversified food streams, and we'll also have one benefit also of restoring of lands is that land, we have a landslide control, and this will also reduce migration, because you know very well that in several areas, some people migrate because either they lost their land because of landslides, or they left even or because in their homeland they don't have enough resources. For example, they don't have enough water, for instance, or they don't have also some food to eat. So so engaging, this is a call to all the youth to engage in the land restoration. We can do it in a various manner. So this is the summary of the presentation of George Okwaro. so I can also interpret in French.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you. So go ahead. Hello, Joel, are you still with us?
Je fais cette présentation en son nom. Donc, c'est un activiste également, quelqu'un qui est engagé dans la restauration des terres et il évolue au Kenya principalement et il travaille sur les questions de restauration dans l'Institut mondial des ressources. Donc, il a débuté son intervention ou bien dans son intervention, il met l'accent sur le fait que l'Afrique est la terre la plus dégradée dans le monde parce que 65% des terres arables de l'Afrique subsaharienne deviennent de plus en plus endommagées pour soutenir une production alimentaire robuste. Et aussi, il relève que 28% de toutes les terres en Afrique subsaharienne sont activement dégradées, ce qui coûte 56 milliards de dollars par an. Et 33% des sols agricoles sont modérément trop dégradés. Et il relève aussi qu'un tiers de toutes les personnes touchées par la dégradation des terres, sont en particulier les pauvres. Et que plus on évolue dans le fil des ans, 48% des forêts sont perdues ou dégradées. Et donc, en raison de la dégradation des terres et du changement climatique, il y a une productivité agricole réduite. Cela affecte plusieurs cultivateurs, cela affecte également plusieurs familles. Et on note également une augmentation de gaz à effet de serre et des risques accrus de catastrophes naturelles, des glissements des terrains et également l'altération du macroclimat et des pertes également de biodiversité. Donc, également, au travers des changements climatiques, on a également des capacités d'adaptation et de résilience qui deviennent de plus en plus réduites pour plusieurs communautés qui deviennent de plus en plus vulnérables, surtout en Afrique. Et également, il mentionne, il relève que la restauration des écosystèmes devrait être perçue comme une opportunité dans laquelle les jeunes devraient se plonger. Il est important de s'engager dans la conservation et la croissance des forêts. Et la gestion durable des forêts devrait être une priorité pour nous tous et on peut le faire au travers de l'agroforesterie, de l'agriculture intelligente, de l'agriculture climato-intelligente et aussi la restauration, selon Georges Okwaro, et la conservation des écosystèmes vont contribuer ou pourraient contribuer à la séquestration des carbones, à également l'écotourisme et également à avoir de l'eau potable plus en écosystème. On a également une protection améliorée contre les glissements des terrains et ça peut également générer des emplois et la nourriture dans plusieurs communautés. Selon Georges Okwaro, les aspects de la résilience de la restauration des écosystèmes comprend le microclimat pour une amélioration dans le microclimat pour une grande productivité et également ça permet également de réguler les débits d'eau, les courants des marées océaniques et améliorer aussi la qualité de l'air et une augmentation de la biodiversité et du cycle des nutriments. Et il pense que les aspects d'adaptation de la restauration plus on est engagé dans la restauration et on pourrait avoir dans plusieurs communautés des flux alimentaires diversifiés, ça veut dire plusieurs genres de nourriture et voilà, et la réduction de la canicule dans plusieurs lieux. Donc, il convient donc de noter aussi que le contrôle le contrôle des glissements des terres réduit la migration. Parce que ce qui est généralement observé, c'est que plus, par exemple, dans des communautés, on a des glissements des terres, ça peut engendrer des catastrophes humaines et ça crée généralement des migrations. Et ainsi, on a plusieurs communautés qui quittent leur terre d'origine à cause des glissements des terrains ou à cause également de la rareté ou la pénurie des ressources, que ce soit l'eau, que ce soit la nourriture. Et plus on est engagé dans la restauration des terres, on pourrait avoir moins de conflits entre des communautés de bergers et les communautés également d'agriculteurs dans plusieurs lieux. Donc, son exposé a beaucoup plus été une forme de motivation, d'incitation à être davantage engagé dans la restauration des écosystèmes. Cela contribue à la justice climatique, mais également aux droits des communautés. Merci.
Thank you very much, Well, for this presentation. Then I want to I want to be sure that Mrs. Nondomiso is there.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Nondomiso. It's not your first participation in one of our webinars. Great ambassador of ANYL4PSD. Delighted to have you this morning. And I want to remind all our attendees that you are coming from South Africa and belong to organization Sinakimvelo Environmental. So you are going to entertain us on the theme environmental awareness and education. So you have the floor. Nondomiso?
Okay.
Okay. It seems that your mic was off, so if you can repeat, please, to ease our understanding of your presentation. Thank you.
All right, cool. Thank you so much. Sorry about the mic muting. I was saying I'm Nondumiso Dumagute from Sinakimvelo Environmental NPO based in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. So today I'll be presenting just on the activities from that NPO. But besides that, I work for the National Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment in South Africa, based in the KZN province, working along the coast, as well as another organization called Women's Leadership and Training Program, where we work with the youth and mostly young women. So having said that, I'm presenting on Sinakimvelo Youth NPO. So today, I'll just give a brief of what we do here and the activities that we've done for 2022. So with Sinakimvelo Youth NPO, okay, I'll try to be slow. I know sometimes I'm very quick when I talk, so I'll try to be very slow. So it's an NPO based in KwaZulu-Natal province in Pietermaritzburg. Within Pietermaritzburg, we work in 3 communities called Gwaqanda, Gijima, and Gwamafunza communities, where we work along the rivers and wetlands, ensuring that we're clearing alien invasive species. We also do environmental education and education for sustainable development for the youth in these communities. We also do health monitoring of wetlands and streams using MINICES and other methods of wetlands monitoring and stream monitoring. We also work with women and youth in developing organic household gardens, where we encourage them to have those small plots, garden plots at home, that they could get their own vegetables. That is linked to one of our themes that we're doing, just waste management mainly. We're also doing and like encouraging the communities to do recycling. I'll explain further how we do that. Just to give a context of where we are, I just said maybe I'll just give an overview of South Africa as a whole instead of just focusing on these communities, because what is happening in our communities is also happening throughout the country. So South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world, where the majority of the wealth is acquired by a few of the society. And then there's our economic growth is very much stagnant, whereby I think 2 quarters ago we went 2 years we went into recession. In the last 2 quarters we haven't really improved in terms of economic growth, and then we've got a number of people on social grants, which is South Africa. It's a blessing in disguise, because if you're thinking if there weren't social grants, where would we as a country? We have more than half of South Africa living in poverty, which is 55% of the population is living in poverty. Whereas I think in Africa, we're one of the most rich countries in Africa. I think we're in the top 3 or so. So now looking at that, 55% of the population is that poor. It shouldn't be happening, but it's happening. And then with the huge unemployment rate, where more than 50% of our youth are unemployed, and some of them have even given up looking for jobs. And we've got 16% of the population with no formal education whatsoever. So yeah, so this is the background of South Africa. So this is what is happening in South Africa, and so this trickles down to our communities as well. And we get a lot of service delivery protests because a lot of things are not being done properly. And then from Sinagimvelo, then we were looking at this context of South Africa, and we said, where could we fit in? And we saw that there's the Millennium Development Goals that were meant to be achieved by 2015, which never happened. But now this Sustainable Development Goals were achieved, and we looked at them and are like, what is proposed with this Sustainable Development Goals? We could actually work on one of the themes or more, and we sort of like were inspired to say, let's try and work within the sphere of Sustainable Development Goals and trying to achieve just a few of the Sustainable Development Goals, because our focus right now is SDG 6, which focuses just mainly on water, but then we also do climate action, we also do education, so it's quite a number, but our main focus is just on SDG 6, which is, we thought it's one of the main limitations that we have in our communities. And within SDG 6, we focusing on waste management, plastic waste management, which pollutes our rivers and wetlands, which is our main source of water. We were like, with the work that we do, we focus on circular economy, which is we try and encourage everybody to say, whatever you do, whenever you're purchasing any items, just think of where what you've purchased will end up at, because in most cases it ends up being in a river or going to the ocean. So that's just the whole idea of our projects. And we do work with the municipality and other NPOs within our community. So we are trying to get our communities, because we do not get in the rural areas, we work in rural areas, and in rural areas we don't get waste collected from the communities. So we always try and encourage the communities to say, please dispose of your waste properly. We understand that nobody is collecting the waste for you, but it's up to you to completely manage it. And recently we having a huge problem where people just decide that they'll take all their waste and put it somewhere near the streams and stuff. So with this project, we go around educating people not to do that. So the activities that we've done so far for 2022, we've done indigenous knowledge systems information sharing, like ensuring that our indigenous knowledge that we have of taking care of our environment is really taken into consideration, because what we understood was with the indigenous knowledge, a lot of our communities have got indigenous knowledge, like with the waste being disposed, they've got a lot of ideas, a as to how we can limit that waste from getting into the streams or rivers. So we just had a key focus on that, and the main focus was just focusing on their spirituality and how it links to them, because most of them fine, we've got tapped waters in our houses, but then again, for a lot of cultural activities, you still need to go to. You can't really do anything if the river is dirty, so that limits you in sort of. So we use that context, and then we've worked with the communities to clear illegal dump sites, because a lot of, like I was saying before, a lot of the communities just now, this new trend of deciding that they will take all their waste and just dispose it to the nearby, their nearest stream. So for this year, we've cleared 3 of these areas, and if you could see the picture at the bottom there, that was the picture before with the waste that was being dumped there. And then above, it has been cleared, and just encourage everybody, just let's plant vegetables. Let's use that space for something else. Then people will not be encouraged to go dump there. And yeah, we've also had a few donations of indigenous trees that we've planted and in these areas, as well as some households in the communities. And then we also work in communities where there's informal settlement. Yeah, so this is something that we started recently. So yeah, like I said, with the trees, some of them were donated to the schools, with the school children, with the message to say, let's plant the indigenous trees and remove the alien plants, because they are using a lot of our water. They really are destroying our water resources. And then with, like I said, with assisting with the informal settlements, some of the households, you're going in there, just focusing on the environment, and then you get there, you look at the condition, you kind of like, nobody should be living in this state. So it's sort of like, it's not really linked to environment, but then it's sort of social project whereby we've decided, okay, what can I do to assist in this household? So you probably one of the things that we did, which was just out of the blue random, was build somebody a house using mud bricks and things that we could find in the local area, and that was very sort of sustainable and didn't really require much from our pockets, but just our workmanship and our time. And then we've also gone around the schools and then just teaching the children of how to ensure that their streams or the wetlands around their areas are clean, and just doing those experiments whereby you show them how the wetlands and the rivers assist in filtering the water that we have, and ensuring that we have the clean rivers or wetlands that will not that will eventually supply our water needs. And then this year, I think Dr. Mzisi, at the beginning, she spoke about the floods in Durban and what was happening in Palmit. I was very interested. I actually laughed because when at the beginning of the year, we had a good opportunity to work with the communities around Palmit and the Quarry Road. So yeah, like if you could see the pictures there, the first picture, that's the Quarry Road informal settlement in Durban, which is about 2 kilometers from Palmit, where you could see there the houses are stable. They are within a wetland, right in the wetland, but the municipality anyway allowed them to be there for whatever reason. And then we were there just before the flood, or 2 weeks before the flood, just making doing community awareness and ensuring that they taking care of the environment and not throwing away the waste in the river. And unfortunately, like 2 weeks later, their place was completely washed out, and which was quite interesting, because you go there, you educating them that with poor waste management and litter, just throwing away litter, you creating a lot of problems, and just with less than a month, something drastic happens, and it's kind of like you did try, but it was a bit too late. So it was something tragic, but something that we are working on. And yeah, so we did assist again with the cleanup, because a lot of the waste was washed up right into the ocean. A lot of people's homes were washed down to the ocean, and it's kind of like we were working on just clearing plastics, but now it's just a whole lot of debris, which we need to do a lot, which it raises up the point that we as communities really do need to take care of what we do with our waste, and the impacts it has if we have natural disasters like floods. And so, yeah, thank you so much for listening to me. And yeah, even though I've gone over time, those are my contact details, as well as my other colleague that I work within ANYL4PSD NPO. Thank you very much.
Well, Nondomiso, we won't let you go like that, because there are questions that are coming from some of our attenders. And this we have a question from Kitijan. I think it's from Senegal. He said, "Good morning, dear panelists. I have a question to ask. What is the link between nature, climate, and environment?" What can you say on that?
Is the link between nature and?
Nature, climate, and environment.
Oh, okay. I think okay. I think yeah. Most of us in this teaching would understand that the link between nature and environment is and climate and nature is that whatever happens with the climate, it impacts what is happening with the environments. So for instance, like I was talking about the floods, the floods took place because of climate change or an event that it was impacted by climate, and so the floods came in, but now those floods are impacting our environment, which is the areas that we're living in. And if we had probably taken proper measures to say that we are taking care of the environment, taking into consideration of the climate, I mean, we wouldn't have had those people living along the streams. They wouldn't be allowed to actually build along those streams, because we understand that in nature things like climate change do happen and floods do happen. So I think it links to all the issues that you plan for, like your disaster management, to say, where am I located? Should anything happen, am I prepared for such eventuality? So I think that is where the link is. You always think in nature always gets impacted by what is happening within the climate. So hopefully I'm not didn't spread the answer for too long. Thanks.
Great. Then this is the last question. Faced the negative degradation of nature and about the climate issues and natural justice and rights of the environment, should we not just apply something as a duty for each of human being? Is the fact of planting one tree every single year of our life. What do you think of that?
I think that would be a great idea. I think not even a single year, maybe every month, because trees are very fallible. You might plant one today and come back 3 months down the line, it's not there. So if you plant one a year, it's really wouldn't be that much of an impact. But then again, it depends on the climate in our areas. Some areas would not allow you to plant trees, but then again, you can actually find something within your community that would work, or support other organizations where trees would work. So I think that's a very good notion, and it's an excellent initiative. And yeah, understanding with trees, again, we're not just planting. There's a reason why we're planting and why we're planting where we are planting. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nondomiso, for taking our time for presentation and also giving answers to our attenders. Thank you very much, and encouraging you working with us, working with ANYL4PSD. Now we are going back to Joel for translation to French language for French attenders. Joel, are you there?
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. So,
and Joel, I want to
thank you.
I want to state a point concerning the answers that Nondomiso brought to understanding of French attenders that ask the questions. If you may give an answer in French, thank you.
So it's sure that I did not very well get her, but anyway, maybe if she writes in the chat box, I'm going to catch up. Okay, so Nondomi, so if it is possible for you to make the to synthesize, yes, your answer, I'm going to catch up for to translate for the French speaking people, because I did not very well get your answers. Thank you. So maintenant, je vais faire la traduction de la présentation de Nondomiso. Donc, elle est déjà un ambassadeur de Nouveau Parc pour la Nature et les Personnes, dont en Afrique du Sud, et elle travaille également avec son organisation qui est appelée Sinakim Vélo, et qui travaille spécialement avec les jeunes, et elle est engagée donc à éliminer les espèces envahissantes, donc le long des rivières et les zones humides dans les communautés, dans plusieurs communautés dans son pays. Et aussi à sensibiliser les jeunes à l'éducation pour l'environnement et le développement durable. Donc, elle également mène des actions de surveillance relatives à la santé des zones humides et des cours d'eau à travers plusieurs méthodes. Donc, Nondomiso également travaille avec les femmes pour développer des jardins familiaux biologiques. Et également, ces actions donc, sont orientées vers le recyclage dans les communautés. Et dans sa présentation, elle a démontré comment est-ce qu'elle se concentre aussi beaucoup plus sur les questions des déchets plastiques. Et elle a dit que l'environnement montre des signes de notre attitude, mauvaise attitude. Par exemple, au travers le fait de jeter des plastiques et d'autres matériaux d'emballage. Et ceci est de plus en plus fréquent dans plusieurs de communautés en Afrique du Sud. Et cela, donc, elle lance un cri pour la réduction des déchets de nature marine et également de nature environnementale. Elle encourage, avec son organisation, ils encouragent les communautés à adopter pleinement une culture de recyclage. Et parmi les activités qu'elle a déjà mises sur pied, on peut noter le partage des plateformes pour le partage d'informations sur les systèmes de connaissances autochtones, parce qu'elle travaille avec les peuples autochtones en Afrique du Sud. Également, le nettoyage des décharges illégales. En Afrique du Sud, dans sa communauté, il y a des décharges qui sont illégales, ça veut dire qu'ils ne sont pas prévus par la municipalité. Et elle essaye donc de s'activer avec des jeunes pour les nettoyer. Et la plantation d'arbres de nature indigène dans plusieurs espaces. Et elle aide également les communautés dans plusieurs quartiers informels. Elle croit, et dans sa présentation, elle nous a démontré qu'elle croit qu'il y a un besoin pour les services de gestion des déchets. Cela ne fonctionne pas toujours très bien dans plusieurs communautés, comme dans plusieurs pays en Afrique. Et c'est aux jeunes de pouvoir donc mener des actions citoyennes pour inciter davantage les communautés à avoir des attitudes amicales à l'égard de l'environnement et en réduisant la pollution au travers des déchets, ce qui aura un impact positif dans la réduction des inondations qui sont de plus en plus fréquentes. Merci.
Thank you very much, Joel. Yeah, and I hope that all French attenders are satisfied by the fact that
Bon, c'est fini avec dans le résumé. Donc, je n'ai pas eu le résumé, la synthèse de la réponse à la question. Donc, un peu désolé, merci.
Non, ok. Bien, je vais tout simplement dire à Kitty Diane, qui est l'un des participants à ce webinaire, pour la deuxième question, que effectivement, face à la dégradation négative de la nature ainsi que la question du climat, et est-ce que la justice de la nature ou le droit de l'environnement ne devrait pas être la chose la plus appliquée comme un devoir pour chaque être humain à planter un arbre dans sa vie chaque année? Évidemment, Nondomiso Dumakouté de l'Afrique du Sud a répondu à cette question, apportant un élément clair. C'est une bonne initiative pour chaque être humain, justement, de planter un arbre dans sa vie, quelle que soit la fréquence avec laquelle il peut le faire. Ça rentre d'ailleurs dans les bonnes pratiques que chacun de nous devrait s'approprier pour pouvoir restaurer notre environnement. Alors, c'est grosso modo la réponse qu'aurait apporté Nondomiso Dumakouté à cette question. Et effectivement, je voudrais aussi relever la question posée par le même élève, disons, sur le lien qui existera entre la nature, le climat et l'environnement. La corrélation est établie par le fait de tous les mouvements qui, justement, se réfèrent à l'environnement, d'abord comme élément essentiel qui est intégré dans la nature, et le climat étant défini comme un ensemble de phénomènes en tant que tel, soit chaud, soit froid, et tous les éléments qui peuvent se rapprocher à cela. Donc, voilà, grosso modo, ce que aurait dit Nondomiso Dumakouté par rapport à ces deux questions. J'espère que Kitty Diane a été satisfait de ces réponses qui lui ont été apportées. So we are going with the presentation of Dr. Thomas Smith from United States of America. He's director of the Center for Tropical Research Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, University of California. Is going to entertain us on the theme biodiversity and forest conservation in tropical Africa. Dr. Smith, you have the floor. Hello, Dr. Smith. Okay. So,
hello, everyone. My name is Tom Smith, and I'll be presenting our talk entitled Conservation Prioritization in the Congo Basin, Planning for 2080. Rainforests of Africa's Congo Basin are critically important for the planet. They store over 60 billion tons of carbon and harbor enormous biodiversity. While there's still tremendous biodiversity left in the Congo Basin, the situation is changing rapidly. These include familiar threats to most of you, things like deforestation, mining, infrastructure, climate change, all add to the many threats. Given the multidimensional threats, we believe is important to revise some of the traditional goals of conservation efforts. So, for example, rather than focus on single habitats, there's a need to protect between them. So another issue is raising, rather than preserving other biodiversity hotspots, there needs to be a focus on the processes that produce and maintain obviously the hotspots of today are not going to be the hotspots of tomorrow. And finally, rather than mitigating one threat at a time, there's an urgent need to integrate approaches that mitigate multiple threats simultaneously. So we've been developing an integrative framework that maps priority areas for conservation biology under climate change. And it does so by taking into account traditional measures such as levels of endemism and species richness, and how ranges may change with climate change, but also trying to figure out how do we adapt, how do we maximize it. Results are then mapped on landscapes. And so what makes our approach a little bit different is that we focused a lot on mapping. And this is because most conservation decision makers use maps. And so we wanted to provide them with maps that they could use. To illustrate how this approach works, we've done this, I'll be talking about in this talk about what we've done with one bird species. This is the little green-billed, an African rainforest species that's found in both mature and secondary forest. Using SNPs derived from genomic data, we've estimated variation and turnover of the little green bull across its range. In panel A shows the sample locations in Cameroon and forest cover. In panel B, we use a gradient forest analysis to associate SNPs with environmental variables to show how they're distributed on the map. Now, variation in the genome corresponding to environmental variables are visualized using different colors. So differences in colors represent areas of adapted genomic variation between and across environments. And so the idea here is if you're capturing multiple colors, you're capturing more genomic variation than you would otherwise. Those differences are further quantified and represented in panel C with higher adaptive turnover areas shown in red and lower adaptive turnover areas in blue. And we've also shown on the map areas of high species richness, which is shown here in green, and areas of high endemism shown in purple. The purple area some may recognize as the Cameroon line. These are include a lot of montane endemics. This shows the patterns of genomic diversity and genomic vulnerability under current and future climate. So the predicted genomic and environmental variation under current and future climate conditions are shown in panel A, which I showed you earlier, but also panel B, which is a future scenario under a RCP of 4.5, so a 2080 scenario in this case. To investigate which populations might be most vulnerable to future climate change, we use the metric genomic vulnerability, defined as the mismatch between current and predicted future genomic variation based on genotype environment relationships modeled using contemporary populations. So here, the absolute difference then from panel A and panel B is what gives you panel C, which is the estimated genomic vulnerability under climate change. Now let's probe this in a little more detail, taking a closer look at panel C. What we have here is a pattern of high vulnerability areas shown in red, and these are where populations are going to have to change the greatest in order to adapt to future climate change. Whereas low vulnerable areas shown in green are where populations will need to change less rapidly to keep pace with climate change. And we've also tried to map on some of the economic threats, socioeconomic threats on this map. These are shown in these black block areas. And this is primarily depicted here by logging and mining, although you could include other variables such as intensive agriculture and so forth, population centers. But for this presentation today, we've just shown the what it looks like for logging and mining. Again, current and protected areas are represented by black outlined polygons, and you can see where they're distributed. So in sum, our findings suggest that coastal and some southern regions show the highest genomic vulnerability and high socioeconomic threats. So it's going to be really very difficult to do effective conservation areas where genomic vulnerability is so high and there's so many socioeconomic threats. Whereas the ecotonal regions between what is now considered rainforest and savanna, these ecotones actually are in green and are going to have lower genomic vulnerabilities. And so as we plan for the future, these are the areas that we might want to consider creating new protected areas or linking to current protected areas in order to mitigate the effect of climate change. Now, there's a couple of important caveats here that I have to stress, and that is future climate predictions are particularly problematic for Central Africa. This has a lot to do with just what the influence of the Atlantic Ocean is going to be on future climate models and currents and so forth. The second is that we know little or nothing about micro-refugial areas that may be important, and this has been talked about somewhat in the literature, but for example, in Cameroon and many tropical areas, you have riparian areas along rivers that may stay relatively cool and contain intact forests, and those might be refugial areas that species can use. And of course, not all the logging and mining areas may happen. These are current and projected ones, so it might be possible to, for example, in an area that's been logged, to reforest that area to do rainforest restoration. So there are some possibilities there. So what are the next steps? Well, the next steps are to integrate data and map genomic vulnerability across 9 diverse taxa. And we're currently doing this. We have been for a number of years now for both Cameroon and Gabon. And we hope to include other species as well, but this list currently includes everything from butterflies to chimpanzees. This is a preliminary multi-taxa genomic vulnerability map that we constructed under future climate change. This is for, again, an RCP of 4.5 for the 2080 scenario. And I just want to use this as an example, even though we know that this is very preliminary for I think the 6 taxa we used to construct it. But it does show some interesting patterns. So for example, you find this large red area in the center of Cameroon, which is high genomic vulnerability. It's going to be really hard for populations to persist in these areas. You can see the current protected areas in green. Many of them are going to be completely consumed by this high vulnerability areas. The other thing is that, if you think about how these species have adapted in the past to changing climate, to persist in the bright red areas 50 years from now, you'll need to evolve at a rate about 300 times faster than they have since the last glacial maximum, which is likely not going to happen. We can also then do a gap analysis where we can show where we might construct new protected areas to link to old ones. So for example, up here in the ecotone, you might link to Bamjurum National Park with other areas that might be appropriate, or over here in the mountains of the Cameroon, where there might be some areas that you could design new protected areas. Note, again, this is very, very preliminary. Well, I want to just thank all our collaborators who were part of this effort. This is part of a larger effort called the Central African Biodiversity Alliance. It's important to note that there are many other papers that are coming out from these studies that are now published in press or in PrEP. And I also want to thank our many funders and who've supported us over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for this brilliant presentation. And I want to go back to Joël for a short, very short translation in French language. Thank you, Joël. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. A great presentation by Dr. Thomas Smith. La traduction de cette présentation qui porte sur la conservation, notamment la priorisation de la conservation des ressources forestières dans le bassin du Congo. Le plan pour 2080, c'est le titre en fait de sa présentation, dont Thomas Smith est un professeur émérite de l'Université de Californie et qui est également directeur d'un centre de recherche sur l'environnement ainsi que le développement durable. Il est fait par mention dans sa présentation que le bassin du Congo est soumis à... Le bassin du Congo, c'est le deuxième poumon de la Terre en matière de... qui permet à la Terre de vivre. Donc, ce bassin du Congo est soumis à des multiples menaces telles que la déforestation, la surpopulation, l'exploitation minière, les infrastructures qui sont de plus en plus croissantes, le trafic des espèces sauvages et le changement climatique. Donc, il a développé avec plusieurs experts un cadre intégré qui cartographie les zones prioritaires pour la conservation de la biodiversité face au changement climatique. Donc, pour ce faire, ce que Dr. Smith fait, il prend en compte des mesures traditionnelles qui existent dans plusieurs communautés, telles que les niveaux endémiques, la richesse des espèces, et il essaye de voir comment est-ce que cela varie en fonction des endroits où la diversité, et il essaie également de voir comment est-ce que la diversité biologique pourrait être maximisée sous l'effet du changement climatique. Les résultats que lui et un groupe d'experts ont déjà eu à faire, c'est que, en fait, lorsqu'ils font ces travaux, ils combinent avec d'autres menaces, ils analysent en fait les impacts socio-économiques et essayent donc de voir comment est-ce que les effets du changement climatique sur la biodiversité pourraient être, les effets du changement climatique sur la biodiversité ainsi que leur impact socio-économique pourrait être hiérarchisé. Donc, ils font ce travail et ils essayent donc de voir les impacts socio-économiques dans différentes zones et essaye de voir comment apporter des solutions à cela. Donc, le moyen privilégié qu'ils utilisent, c'est surtout la cartographie des paysages. Et ils utilisent la cartographie des paysages comme outil qui va aider à la prise de décision pour la conservation de la biodiversité. Donc, pour illustrer cette technique qu'ils utilisent, ils l'ont fait pour un oiseau de la forêt tropicale africaine qui est le petit bulbe vert et à l'aide donc d'un instrument délivré de la géomatique, ils ont estimé donc la variation et le renouvellement de cet oiseau vert dans son aire de répartition. Et également, ils ont fait des échantillonnages au Cameroun sur plusieurs couverts forestiers. Et ils ont aussi utilisé des analyses de forêt pour associer donc à plusieurs variables environnementales. Donc, ils ont également travaillé sur le génome, c'est-à-dire le gène de cet oiseau et essayer donc de voir comment est-ce que les changements climatiques a un impact sur la reproduction de cet oiseau. Et ils ont également étudié quelles populations pourraient être les plus vulnérables au futur par rapport au changement climatique. Et pour ce faire, ils ont utilisé plusieurs métriques telles que la vulnérabilité génomique et également, ils ont défini en termes d'inadéquation dans plusieurs lieux. Et leurs travaux leur ont permis de comprendre qu'il existe une variation génomique entre l'actuel et le futur, prévu sur la base des relations génotypes. Ça, c'est vraiment plus en termes, c'est vraiment de la biologie pure. Donc, sur la base des relations génotypes, environnement, et que cela également a un effet sur nos populations contemporaines. Dans sa présentation, il a déclaré que pour mieux conserver l'écosystème, il faudrait beaucoup plus, au lieu de se concentrer uniquement sur les habitats uniques, il est nécessaire de protéger les habitats complexes. Il pense également que plutôt que de préserver uniquement les points chauds de la biodiversité, il est nécessaire de se concentrer sur les processus qui produisent et maintiennent la biodiversité. Il pense également que plutôt que d'atténuer une menace à la fois, il est nécessaire d'adopter une approche intégrée qui atténue plusieurs menaces simultanément. Merci.
Thank you very much, Joël. Merci beaucoup pour ce résumé, pour aider nos participants francophones. Si vous nous rejoignez rien que maintenant, sachez que vous êtes en train de suivre le webinaire sur la justice climatique organisé par ANYL4PSD, qui est une organisation panafricaine agissant à travers le continent. Alors, nous allons prendre un autre intervenant ce matin, qui va effectivement nous entretenir sur une autre thématique très importante. Il s'agit bel et bien de Maou Nigan Kofi Valentin du Togo, membre de l'Association des professionnels en gestion et conservation de la biodiversité, abrégé APRO-GCB. Il est également membre de l'UICN Papaco. Il va nous entretenir sur le thème ANYL4PSD et responsabilité des ambassadeurs. Valentin, vous avez la parole.
Vous m'écoutez?
Oui, nous vous écoutons très bien.
Ok, alors bonjour à vous et bonjour à chers panélistes et participants. Donc ce matin, je vais vous parler un peu de notre réseau et ce que les ambassadeurs y font. Ok, donc il faut dire que l'African Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development, c'est une plateforme de plus de 800 organisations et réseaux opérant à travers l'Afrique et certains pays à l'étranger, conduisant la coalition internationale pour le nouveau pacte pour la nature des personnes. Donc, un ambassadeur de ce réseau, c'est en fait un représentant de ce réseau dans son pays ou bien dans sa région. Et il est appelé à contribuer à la réalisation de la vision positive dans son pays et sa région et à contribuer à la mise en œuvre de la feuille de route de nouveaux pactes pour la nature et des personnes. Alors, et nous, en tant qu'ambassadeurs, sommes appelés à militer pour arrêter et à inverser la perte catastrophique de la biodiversité, à mettre la nature sur le chemin de rétablissement pour des générations présentes et futures, à céder à la restauration des forêts et à mettre en œuvre les engagements nationaux et internationaux, assurer la bonne gouvernance, les droits de l'homme et la consolidation de la paix, protéger les espèces végétales et animales, à s'attaquer aux causes profondes des nombreuses menaces graves en soutenant leurs aires protégées, en réprimant le commerce illégal d'espèces de faune sauvage et en influençant le choix des consommateurs. Donc, voilà un peu quelques objectifs que vise un ambassadeur, bien quelques actions qu'un ambassadeur de ANYL4PSD peut faire. Donc, comme action, il est appelé à sensibiliser et à former les populations, à informer, à éduquer et à communiquer pour un changement comportemental et social, à l'organisation des conférences, des tables rondes, des rencontres, et aussi à exécuter des projets de conservation. Donc, nous, à notre niveau, au Togo, avec notre association des professionnels en gestion et conservation de la biodiversité et l'Union internationale pour la conservation de la nature, notamment à
Sophie?
travers... Oui.
Oui,
Alors,
il serait souhaitable que vous essayiez de jouer votre présentation de telle manière que ce soit plus lisible.
OK.
Cliquez sur le 4e icône juste à l'extrémité gauche.
C'est bon?
Voilà, merci.
OK, merci. Donc, je disais tantôt, et comme ambassadeur de ANYL4PSD et membre des réseaux tels que l'Association des professionnels pour la conservation de la nature, et ambassadeur régional pour ANYL, excusez-moi, est-ce que vous m'écoutez? Allô?
Oui, je suis sain.
OK, donc je disais que avec notre réseau et Association des professionnels pour la gestion et la conservation de la biodiversité, et avec l'Union internationale pour la conservation de la nature, notamment le programme Air protégée d'Afrique et conservation, nous essayons d'organiser des séances de communication pour le changement social et comportemental avec les étudiants des différentes grandes licences master de l'Université de Lomé au Togo, dans les salles de cours, dans les amphithéâtres, dans le but de les engager plus à nous rejoindre pour les actions que nous faisons. Et ici, vous avez quelques photos qui illustrent effectivement nos activités que nous faisons avec nos pairs et ici. Et autre action que nous faisons aussi, c'est que nous faisons des séances de formation avec des responsables d'associations, d'organisations que nous connaissons afin de discuter sur des sujets et de pouvoir voir dans quelle mesure nous pouvons coopérer. Donc, ces séances de formation, souvent, c'est sur des thèmes tels que la biodiversité, le bien-être humain, la conservation des espèces et des menaces locales et mondiales qui pèsent sur ces espèces, les conventions internationales sur la protection de la nature et les conventions des ressources naturelles, le changement climatique et la vulnérabilité des espèces face au changement climatique. Alors, autre action aussi, ou bien autre activité que nous sommes appelés, surtout en tant qu'ambassadeurs, à faire, c'est à collaborer avec le pouvoir public à travers les ministères pour voir découvrir leurs programmes, les projets et les actions en lien avec la conservation de la nature et des ressources naturelles, pour avoir des informations sur l'état actuel de la conservation de la biodiversité, la gestion des aires protégées, des réserves de faune, des forêts classées, des zones de gestion des habitats des espèces, s'informer sur les statistiques actuelles pour voir quels sont vraiment les effets du changement climatique sur les populations, les ressources naturelles, sur les ressources naturelles, ainsi que les efforts que les ministères entreprennent et impliquer vraiment les populations, les jeunes en particulier. Puisqu'il faut dire que nous disons que les jeunes ne sont pas vraiment associés à des décisions, à des actions de conservation. Et là, il faut que les jeunes aussi s'apprêtent à aller vers cette structure pour voir ce qu'il faut faire, ce qu'ils sont en train de faire et en quoi on peut collaborer. Donc, de ces séances de formation à la fin, comme vous allez voir la 4e photo ici, nous récupérons des documents, des politiques, des plans, des projets d'action, des stratégies de lutte contre la biodiversité, contre l'érosion côtière. Donc, tous ces documents-là nous sont vraiment utiles à nous jeunes pour voir ce qui se fait et comment nous pouvons accompagner ces ministères aussi. Alors, il faut aussi, en tant qu'ambassadeur bien jeune, collaborer avec les organisations non gouvernementales, les universités, les laboratoires de recherche, surtout les muséums d'histoire naturelle, pour faire des travaux de recherche sur la faune, les inventaires fauniques, le suivi écologique, etc. Et il faut dire qu'aujourd'hui, on ne peut pas dire qu'on veut protéger quelque chose qu'on ne connaît pas. Et effectivement, donc, pour aimer ce qu'on veut protéger ou bien pour protéger quelque chose, il faut d'abord l'aimer. L'aimer, c'est en fait connaître. Donc, nous avons vu que la majorité de personnes connaissent mieux les plantes que les animaux et surtout les jeunes, puisque bon, l'étude des animaux, c'est un peu difficile du fait que les animaux ne sont pas fixes, ne sont pas sur place. Et il faut vraiment du temps, de la patience pour pouvoir avoir des études. Mais ça serait vraiment louable que les jeunes s'engagent aux côtés de ces organisations, aux côtés de ces structures qui ont des histoires naturelles. Puisque nous disons aussi que, bon, nous avons la perte de la biodiversité. Les espèces, même nous ne connaissons même pas nos espèces, nos faunes, ce que nous avons dans nos forêts. Donc, il faut voir ce qui était fait déjà Or, dans les muséums d'histoire naturelle, vous allez voir que nous-mêmes, nous ne connaissons pas nos animaux, mais ces muséums retracent effectivement l'histoire par des collections depuis l'époque coloniale. Donc, faire des études, voir est-ce qu'il y a encore présence ou absence de ces spécimens dans le milieu naturel, comprendre les effets vraiment de la variabilité climatique sur ces espèces. Donc, c'est ce que nous essayons de faire aux côtés des muséums d'histoire naturelle, notamment le Field Museum d'Histoire de Chicago, que nous avons fait quelques activités. Donc, en termes de résultats impact, il faut dire que nous avons quand même réussi à toucher plus de 200 jeunes universitaires lors de nos activités de sensibilisation et nous ont permis effectivement la participation des jeunes et ont motivé plus d'engagement puisqu'à la fin de chaque activité que nous organisons, nous voyons qu'en fait, il y a beaucoup de jeunes qui nous rejoignent pour notre lutte. Donc, les actions aussi ont favorisé un esprit d'analyse sur des enjeux de conservation. Et ces actions, nos actions ont approfondi et ont consolidé des connaissances sur la gestion et la protection de l'environnement, favoriser la mise en œuvre des acteurs, puisqu'on ne peut pas, dans cette course, dans cette quête de la protection de nos ressources, de lutter contre les changements climatiques, nous ne pouvons pas aller seul. Il va falloir qu'on aille vers les autres organisations, les autres personnes, des ministères, des partenaires qui font la même chose que nous et essayer de voir dans quelle mesure nous pouvons collaborer pour qu'ensemble, nous arrivons à avoir les mêmes objectifs, les mêmes résultats que nous poursuivons tous. Donc, voilà un peu ce que nous faisons en tant qu'ambassadeur de ANYL4PSD. Donc, voilà quelques actions. Donc, nous sommes arrivés ainsi à la fin de notre présentation. Donc, je vous remercie. Allô?
Merci Valentin. Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation. J'ose croire que beaucoup de nos participants ce matin en sont fièrement satisfaits de ce que vous avez fait. So now we are turning in English language with the translation made by Joel for the last presentation of Valentin Kofi from Benin.
OK, merci. Merci beaucoup, Valentin, pour cette présentation. So Valentin Kofi is from Togo. He's a New Deal for Nature and People ambassador. So the New Deal for Nature and People is led by African Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development. So Valentin is committed to climate justice. He organizes communication sessions for social and behavioral change with students and different grades, bachelor, master of university in Lomé, in the capital of his country, in classrooms and amphitheaters, in order to engage his peers to join the struggle of climate justice. So the training sessions, he works in various issues, not only biodiversity, but also human well-being, species conservation, local and global traits of two species. And they work and they hold also various conferences and also debates on international convention on the protection of nature and the conservation of natural resources. Topics like climate change and the vulnerability of species to climate change. And also they implement several programs and projects, action related to conservation of nature and natural resources. So they are working to set a database of information regarding the biodiversity conservation, management of protected areas, wildlife reserves, classified forests, habitat, and species management areas. So they also work with statistics and learn about the statistics, and they are engaged in research and trying to analyze the effect of climate change on the population and natural resources, as well as the efforts undertaken by the ministry. So they are committed not just only to, but they make this kind of research that is active research research for action, and by involving students and also giving them the voice. So Valentine collaborates with several NGOs, universities, research laboratories, and the natural history museums. Yes, to do research on wildlife, wildlife inventories, ecological monitoring. And these help him to identify the threat to species and also means to conservation. So his actions so far have allowed the participation of young people and have motivated them for more commitment toward ecosystem safeguard. And his actions also have contributed to foster an analytical mind about conservation issues. And his action also have deepened and consolidated the knowledge on the management and the protection of environment. They have also favored the networking with several stakeholders. So this is the summary of the presentation of Valentine from Togo. Thank you.
Thank you also, Joel. Hope that all participants are satisfied by this presentation made in both language. So we are moving closer to the end of this webinar with this presentation from Dr. David. No, not Dr. David, but first we start with Kevin Jabo from Cameroon. And name of organization is Congo Plastic Institute. Pardon?
Trop rapide.
Hello? Okay.
Please,
so
put off the mic of Valentine.
Yeah, if the technical staff can close off. Yeah, good, let's go. The next presentation will be made by Kevin Jabo from Cameroon. He's a member of Congo Basin Institute, and he will focus on the theme nature-based and regenerative solutions, biology's role in sustaining the planet. Hello, Kevin, and welcome.
My name is Kevin Jabo. I'm an associate adjunct professor at the University of California and also the Africa director for the Congo Basin Institute. So today I'm going to be talking about biology's role in sustaining the earth. We're looking at nature-based and regenerative solutions when we want to make sure we can save our earth. But before we start looking at biology's role, there are some simple questions we need to ask ourselves. What is climate change? How is it important to us? We know we've heard a lot about climate change, and now we know that that is the defining issue of our time, because we are at that moment. We are at the defining moment. So if you look at from the things that happen around us, shifting weather patterns that will threaten our food, to the rising sea levels that will increase the risk of catastrophic floods, we see the impacts of climate change and are global in scope, and they are unprecedented in scale. So a recent report in Nature this year shows that over the next 50 years, climate change could drive more than 15,000 new cases of mammals transmitting viruses to other mammals. So which means we're looking at a boost of viral outbreaks because of climate change. But how do we respond to climate-induced natural disasters? How are we prepared to respond to these diseases? We can look at it at a global scale. But I want to just bring it down. Let's just look at Africa, for example. We can check the floods in South Africa. We can look at the droughts in Eastern Africa. We can talk about tropical cyclones that are hitting Madagascar. And what we see, the things that used to be some extreme, infrequent weather events, they are now becoming our new normal. But we know that with the right foresight, if we invest enough of our time and preparedness, we can together greatly reduce the impact of these events and try to respond appropriately. But before we respond, we need to understand what is going on. What are those factors that are responsible for this increasing zoonosis emergence? When we talk about zoonosis, we're looking at diseases that are being transmitted from animals to humans. And we see that the things that we do every day, deforestation or other land use changes, we look at illegal poaching or regulation of our wildlife trade, to intensified agriculture, all that in climate change. We see that all those different activities are those simple factors that are increasing the diseases that are being transmitted from animals to humans. And one of the ways looking at how to solve that is coming out with this One Health approach, which means we need to recognize that the health of us, all humans on the planet, is closely connected to the health of animals and our shared environment, which means that every time we reduce or we increase that proximity or the close contact with animals and our natural environment, we provide that opportunity for diseases to pass from one animal to humans. And so it comes with lots of different implications as we move forward. We can break it down into 3 different simple ways to address them. And I'm going to look at these 3 different goals, and if we can achieve them, then we can be really sure we are using biology to address the issues that affect our planet today. The first is a healthy planet, which means fewer diseases. When we stay healthy, when we stay clean, we mean we reduce the disease outbreak. Secondly, let us make sure the wild is kept wild. And thirdly, we need to build a different economy. We need to make sure we have buy-in from local people. We need to make sure we have buy-in from all the different stakeholders. So if we address these 3 things, making sure that we keep the planet healthy, keeping the wild in the wild, and defining a different economy, we are going to be addressing these issues. And how do we do that? We can go back 2 years ago, which what we call the super year of. In 2020, we called it a big year for biodiversity, because it was supposed to be that year where so many different things were going to be addressed. As recently as February 2019, the United Nations proclaimed 2020 to be a super year, where a lot of landmark global meetings were planned. We talked about a World Conference in France, to the United Nations Conference in Portugal, or the Nature Summit in New York. And all of these discussions from this super year would have culminated in October at a major biodiversity conference in China, which was billed at the time as a Paris for biodiversity. But it looked like nature had other plans for us. We didn't get to respect the 2020 super year because the coronavirus pandemic came in and put everything else on the back burner. So talking about biology, talking about biodiversity, when we talk about biodiversity, we're talking about the variety and variability of living organisms and all the ecological complexes in which they occur. All of these seem to have been shunted aside because of the coronavirus outbreak. But when we look closer, we now see that there's a huge link between pandemics and biodiversity. And those links are becoming clearer and better appreciated. So, but how did we get here in the first place? What happened? What are those drivers of these zoonotic diseases? Clearly, we said, what are those factors that are responsible for creating this zoonotic emergence? Changes in the environment, which is a result of human activities, the things that we do. And clearly, most of the science is showing that bat-associated viruses, which were thought to be the cause of the coronavirus, emerged from the loss of bat natural habitats because of deforestation for agricultural expansion. We are encroaching into natural habitats. And we keep doing that for lots of different activities: logging, mining, building roads in remote places, trying to do irrigation schemes and dam buildings, coastal development, urbanizations. All of those are encroachment into natural habitats. And in doing that, we become uncomfortably close to all this natural wildlife that live in their natural spaces. And what does that result? When we keep destroying those habitats, we see that they yield less food and send all foraging wildlife into contact with humans. In that process, we create vectors for zoonotic bacteria, viruses, and parasites. And we've been seeing that in the last 50 years, we've lost 60% of wildlife. And in that same period, the number of infectious diseases has quadrupled. So as we're doing that, we are bringing ourselves closer to wildlife, and then we are not respecting the second objective on the side: the wild must be kept wild. And all of that together is being exacerbated by climate change. As we were saying that today, as the science is showing us, that climate change will going to alter and accelerate the transmission patterns of so many diseases across the world. A 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature means changing the abundance, changing genetic composition, changing the survival and the behavior of so many different species. And because of that, as we're doing business as usual, more than 1 million species of plants and animals are at the risk of extinction today. Over 40% of our insects are at the risk. And we see that biodiversity loss and climate change, they all go hand in hand, becoming this cycle of life, and unfortunately, a cycle of death. Because now a lot of people rely on natural environment for their survival, for their livelihood, for food security. And if we keep destroying, it can lead to mass migration, the risk of many companies becoming significant, huge economic impacts in different parts of the world. So we need to change the paradigm. How do we do that? What simple examples can we be talking about? The first thing is, we talk about the Congo Basin Institute. After 100 years of its existence, the University of California decided to partner with the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture to form the Congo Basin Institute in the heart of the Congo Basin forest in Central Africa, in the country of Cameroon. What we've done there, we are creating facilities which offer researchers from different parts of the world to work with local scholars in remote places, in natural settings, and in degraded areas to understand the forest. We are also building that network of interconnected environmental data so that everybody can really understand what is going on the ground. We want to make sure Africans become the solutions of problems in Africa. But by doing that, you need to build those infrastructure and give them access to the greatest tools. One of the simplest things which we need to address, and we ask ourselves, and I'm throwing that out, where do you think chocolates come from? Simple question. We love chocolates. Where do they come from? They come from cocoa beans, which grew on trees? It's a simple answer. But when we dive deeper, what do we see? We see that countries in West and Central Africa collectively supply over 75% of the world's cocoa crop. So countries like Cote d'Ivoire alone provides about 2 million tons of cocoa. Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, Togo, 1.5 million tons. And what's interesting is, if they produce so much cocoa and we all love chocolate, then what's the average income of that average cocoa farmer in West and Central Africa? Less than $1 a day, which is kind of interesting, right? And when you think about it, when you look at the value chain of the cocoa industry, when you provide 75% of the raw material for a $100 billion industry, and you get back 6% of returns, it means something is fundamentally wrong. So in order to address these issues, we need to look at the cause, we look at the source. So as part of the Congo Basin Institute, we came together to work with different partners to say, how can we make trade a sustainable force or a positive force in the world? How can we make it sustainable? Looking at these major commodities, we talked about cocoa. We cannot be producing 75% of the raw materials and get 6% of the returns. It makes it unsustainable. So what we try to do is, we've understood that there is unequal distribution of these resources. And because of that, it's going to make the world unlikely to reach all these international ambitions, such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the CBA project, what we try to make sustainable trade a positive force by focusing on the impact of trade of specific goods like cocoa, like palm oil, what we call internationally traded commodities, and also complementing that with locally important food crops to try to seek solutions to these impacts. Together with these, our partners, we study all the stages of the supply chain. We look at the damaging links and pathways for lasting change. And we've come together with 12 research hubs across 85 countries across the world, 500 researchers, and over 400 partner organizations to look at specific needs. We're trying to make sure we can reduce need for land expansion, deforestation. We're trying to conserve forest carbon by using the latest climate mitigation techniques so that we can stabilize climate locally, but regionally, and increase that resilience for agriculture, in the process boosting local and national economies. And also for these specific communities, trying to increase the viability for the businesses within the commodities of cocoa, palm oil, bush mango, ginseng, and you name them. At the end of the day, there must be a win-win solution for both the people and the environment, which is what we call it benefits biodiversity. So that alone, that's one of the simple projects that can address the issues of trade. Secondly, we talk about ebony. Ebony wood is a tropical forest species that has been exploited for thousands of years for musical instruments. Ebony has very good tonal qualities and used in small pieces for making bridge and fingerboards of guitars and pianos. But we didn't know anything about the ecology of the species, where it comes from, how it survives in the forest. So we asked ourselves, what's the simplest way to bring out a viable, sustainable ebony production and logging model for Cameroon? And how do we make sure we can engage local people in the process? We try to address it using 4 clear factors, looking at the environmental issues so that we understand the ecology of the species, bring in the science to see where they grow, how we can propagate them, looking at the economics where local people can get engaged and see it becomes a win-win for them, and make sure we talk about the policy and legal implications so we can be addressing issues of land tenure so we can make sure the local people feel ownership to the process and make sure there is documentation to back those actions such that future generations can benefit from these activities. The third project, which I'm going to talk about, mapping pangolins. Pangolins are the most trafficked animals in the world, and it is mostly used in Asia because for traditional Chinese medicine. But what we try to do is, because they have been pushed out of Africa heavily, so let us look at how do we get information on the movement of this pangolin and the scales of pangolins across the full trafficking chain, from poaching in the wild to amassing the scales to the transit patterns and ultimately to the destination where there is final consumption. And we do this by using two simple and innovative approaches. We talk about building a genoscape of pangolins, the genetic map of where pangolins are found in their natural habitats. Then we look at social network modeling so that we can get a comprehensive picture of pangolin trafficking from Africa all the way to Asia. We've come up with phenomenal results showing where the trades are. So the policy implications for this are going to tell the governments and the policymakers and the local people where it is being traded, where it is being consumed, where it is being pushed, so we can together work to save the species and make sure the wild stays in wild. Lastly, we also need to be addressing local people. We need to be able to address unemployment and joblessness. We need to be able to address despair and evaporating remittances across the tropical African countries. And what the CBI is doing is making sure we can partner with Agriculture for Africa, talking and addressing the youth, where we can mentor and build them in such a way that if they commit petty crimes and they get locked up in a system, they are rehabilitated. Because if we don't do that, when they get into the system, they become hardened criminals. And when they come out, they go back into that cycle of crime. So by building them, by teaching them all these innovative skills, working with them across these different projects of pangolin trafficking, building genoscapes, agriculture, looking at positive force for these major commodities, making them agripreneurs will reduce recidivism in such a way that they come out, they build, they learn skills, and they become very useful in your environment. So we see that simple things can be done, and simple examples, what we call these nature-based solutions, using the biodiversity, using our own role to bring in solutions to the environment. So all these simple opportunities can make sure we can engage in climate justice, clearly showing that in order for the planet to stay healthy, we need just simple projects to make the difference. To ensure that the world is kept wild, we need to think about restoration programs. We need to be making sure that we're putting back into nature, harvesting sustainably, we can live in contact with them. And in that process, engage all stakeholders. Everybody must be part of the problem, and everybody must be part of the solution, because together we can build a better world and a different economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you also for this presentation. Mr. Kevin Jabo from Cameroon. So we are calling usual for the translation in French language of this presentation. But before I want to remind something to clear understanding of everybody here. There is an attendance sheet that has been shared in the chat box for everyone. So you just fill the attendance sheet to prove your participation to this teaching on climate justice that we are running this time, as we are getting close to the end of this webinar session 2, because we started activities yesterday
So we are just continuing today, and very soon we are going to end it. Alors, je voulais juste rappeler très brièvement à tous les participants bien vouloir remplir la fiche de présence qui leur a été partagée dans la boîte à dialogue. Vous pouvez juste la remplir. Question de prouver votre présence, votre participation à ces travaux.
Okay, merci Emmanuel. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. We want to thank,
Was I online? Ok, je reprends pour l'audience francophone de ce webinaire. Il y a une liste de présence que vous devez remplir. Elle a été partagée dans la boîte à dialogue. Donc, bien vouloir remplir cette liste de présence. Question pour vous de faire preuve de participation à ces travaux qui ont débuté hier et qui s'achèvent aujourd'hui. So, for those that did not get me in English, I was saying that there is an attendance sheet that you have to fill. It's been shared to you in the chat box. Just press on the link that the technical staff is releasing on the chat box to fill the attendance sheets. Yeah. Okay. Now we are getting close to the end of this webinar, and the last speaker that's going to focus on the theme of operationalizing climate justice is coming from United States of America and member of the U.S. Agency for International Development, former Science, United States Department of State. So he's going to share with us the last presentation of this webinar we started yesterday, and is Dr. David Cameron. Please, Doctor, you have the floor.
Good day. It's an absolute pleasure to talk with you today, and I look forward to hearing how the summit went. I'm going to talk today about the opportunities to operationalize climate justice to support global sustainability, local community empowerment, and in particular, making justice, racial, socioeconomic, and gender justice core to our climate agenda and our climate missions. And as I think you'll see in the comments I'm going to offer today, I actually think that adding justice as a co-equal part of the climate story makes solving this earth-shattering problem easier. You can see my affiliations both at the University of California, Berkeley, where I'm a faculty member, and in particular at Power Africa and USAID, where I'm the senior advisor on energy innovation. I've served previously in the US government, both in the Department of Energy and as science envoy for the State Department. So it's really a pleasure to talk with you today about what I see as finally an agenda that brings justice to the forefront of dealing with the greatest problems facing the planet. As we think about the opportunities that face us today, let me just start with an orienting graph to really highlight the degree to which only 2 years ago, we were in the blue zone, meaning the mixture of policies or the lack of policies were putting us on a path to warm the planet by 3 degrees Celsius or more. With the recent announcements over the last year by President Biden and the new administration that I'm very pleased and honored to be part of, the announcements that have come out of Japan, South Korea, South Africa, Nigeria, a number of countries that have established decarbonized net zero goals by mid-century, We now have a path to get to what is now called the optimistic scenario, warming the planet only by about 2 degrees Celsius. 2 degrees Celsius sounds not so bad, but we also know that that could mean more than 15 degrees Celsius at the poles, still an earth-shattering equation. To get to the optimistic scenario, that which I and many colleagues worked on in our time in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, means we need to get in the green zone, where we don't warm the planet by more than 1.5 degrees. That goal is still possible, but it requires action today. And as you'll see in these comments, it requires action today based on not only climate science, technology, policy, economic innovation, but placing justice, social justice at the core of this agenda. And I say that for a number of reasons. Not only do we know that we live in a massively unequal world, but we've seen at some critical opportunities that making justice co-equal has truly changed these stories in some interesting ways. Some of these are settled law, and some of these are still things we're working on. In California, where I'm based as a professor, 35% of our cap and trade revenues from our carbon pricing regime have to go to serve underserved communities, fence line communities, those with unacceptable air and water quality. And out of our annual carbon cap and trade revenues of around 11 billion a year, that's at least 3.5 billion. And that's a floor, not a ceiling. As a candidate, now President Biden did that better. He took the California 35 and launched something called Justice 40, committing to spend 40% of federal infrastructure money on low-income, underserved communities. I urge you to take a look at the Justice 40 pathway, and I urge you to also look at the ways that countries that have made commitments have upped that story or have adapted to local conditions. And the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, both Nigeria and South Africa committed to their own decarbonization pathways that also put justice as the center of the equation. And the picture at the bottom is myself, the Director of Power Africa, Mark Karato, the Ministers of Power and of Environment from Nigeria, and the United Nations Special Representative Damilola Ogunbiyi, the spokesperson, the point of action for Sustainable Development Goal number 7, Universal Energy Access, and her team. That's really the story we're fighting for, and we've seen concrete actions. Just a few months after being elected president and then inaugurated, President Biden held the 2021 Climate Leaders Summit, which focused on climate justice. Here we can see at the top, not only President Biden, along with the domestic climate czar, Gina McCarthy, and my former boss at State Department, our international climate czar, or SPEC, John Kerry, talking to global leaders, including the new Secretary of Energy, my colleague from Berkeley, Jennifer Granholm, and people like Erica Mackey, who runs a group called GRID, which is a social justice, clean energy deployment group that works with people who drop out of school, that come out of the prison system, to build skills in the new clean energy economy. When we look at the global map, the race to net zero, I mentioned that there's a range of goals. The red goals are countries that have mid-century 2050 goals. We saw at COP26, South Africa and Nigeria announcing major goals on the continent, and that is to get to carbon neutrality by mid-century 2050 for South Africa, 2060 for Nigeria, but to center in that story climate and social justice. In fact, the reasons for this, of course, are obvious to this group, but it's critical to recognize that there's data to back up the need for justice. One of the most striking versions, in fact, I wish this was perhaps the most commonly shown plot. It's not, but it should be, to highlight just how scary a world we live in. And that is, the richest 1% of the world contribute about 15% of global emissions over the period of time from 1990 to 2015. And the richest 10% of the world are over half of global emissions, with the poorest 50% of the world, only 7%. So we have a world turned on its head, where access to education, to energy, to water services, to medical services are simply lacking for those who had the misfortune to be born poor, to be born brown, to be born women in much of the world. We have to flip this agenda. Flipping this agenda is one that will make solving the climate problem easier, not harder. We do have some important efforts moving forward. In California, we've developed something called CalEnviroScreen. It's a series of metrics geo-referenced around the state so we can track air quality, water quality, pollution issues. This is an ongoing effort, building more and more metrics, from lead exposure to traffic to drinking water to problems of toxic waste sites, asthma cases. It's a nuanced way to build an evolving platform to track the impacts of environmental injustice and to trace those back to opportunities to improve our global decarbonization by targeting the people most commonly left out, intentionally or unintentionally, often intentionally, left out of the equation of bringing better service to people on the planet. This we have to change, and we are starting to have the tools to make this happen. Now, I mentioned the effort that President Biden had done. One of the most critical, certainly not a perfect metric, but an absolute quantum leap forward, is the executive order he signed in his first day in office, calling for the federal US government to use a so-called social cost of carbon in all of its analysis. That's a price on carbon emissions that takes into account not only the damages from CO2, but also methane, and takes account those damages to ecosystems, to the planet, and critically to people. It's not a perfect tool, no individual economic mechanism is, but it absolutely advances the conversation around how do we get to pricing mechanisms that reflect the damage we're doing to our ecosystem and to our brothers and sisters around the planet. This is one of the steps I urge every country to take a hard look at. It's a massive step forward analytically. It sends the right signal to business and industry, and it highlights the opportunity that we have to finally recognize the damage we do to ourselves is one that we'll never fix unless we price out pollution in a reasonable way. This evolves the conversation in many ways, and I won't dwell on the details, but if we look at a map of the United States as one example, to look at what is the least cost form of energy, here's a map where nuclear in blue, there's a small pocket, natural gas in this rust color, wind in green, solar in mauve. This is the least cost price with no price of carbon. The price of carbon where I live in California is not $0 per ton of CO2. It's about $20. But if we jump to the social cost of carbon of $50, what transformed? Social cost of carbon may be as high as $100. It's at least $50. And we see a map here where there's essentially no natural gas left. It's a map dominated by solar in mauve, wind in green, and a little bit of nuclear as the least cost form of energy. This would transform the decisions and would greatly enable the commitment of this US administration to decarbonize our energy system entirely by 2035 on the way to a 2050 entirely decarbonized economy of what is the largest economy on the planet. There are many other examples of taking these metrics seriously. The United Nations Environment Program has the so-called Small Grants Initiative. It's an effort that gives, with very low bureaucracy, $50,000 grants. And it's something that puts social inclusion and impact and metrics of how we're taking into account socioeconomic and ecological damage into account of awarding these grants. It's putting this idea into practice. And I want to highlight that as we think through how to really do this, we have to recognize the problem. We have to recognize that inequality is perhaps a bigger problem even than climate change. We must fix both, but we will not likely fix climate change. In fact, I believe it's impossible to fix climate change if we don't recognize the inequality and the massive difference in access of all resources based on color of one's skin, gender, where we're born, etc. We need to develop data-based metrics to get there. And then we need to develop inclusive decision-making tools, something which is largely lacking in the planet. The voice of climate youth is sadly cut out of conversation after conversation. I highlight that in two ways. In efforts to fix that, in Nigeria, the power sector reform program is based around a social inclusion metric. And here is a meeting that we had in Glasgow with climate youth leaders from East and West Africa, from the United States, myself as the USA representative, talking about what are the mechanisms we can center the needs of those who are least empowered, but those who will maximally inherit the world we damage. Thankfully, the analytics are on our side. When we look at the job creation potential, both direct jobs, the indirect jobs, the industries that are associated with supporting energy generation, wires for transmission, etc. That's the direct and the indirect jobs. And then the induced jobs, the hardest to quantify, those are the jobs that come associated with these changes. And what we see is the jobs, whether you want to just look at direct plus indirect, direct, indirect, and induced, they're dramatically higher by investing in clean energy. In some cases, almost an order of magnitude higher by investing in clean energy than some of the dirty energy solutions opportunities. This is a real transformative picture. We can utilize this to make clean energy the place to invest for the new world, not a way to perpetuate the inequalities and pollution of the old world. In fact, detailed case studies, power plant by power plant, keep demonstrating the story. We know that right now coal is about 44% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And we also know that we have to phase out coal, and we must ultimately also phase out natural gas. Well, when we start to look at the benefits here, here is one example. This is a 1 gigawatt coal plant in Teruel, Spain. And the analysis done by the Spanish government and by the utility is that that plant can be replaced with a larger solar plant, solar and wind power, backed up with energy storage. And interestingly, there are more jobs in the new plant than the old plant. Because solar and wind are now the least cost energy sources for much of the world, this is a project that will cut costs for the utility and will not only retain hiring all of the current employees, but there will be additional employment needed. So this will be a net source of new jobs with zero loss in existing jobs to the plant. It's that transition story that's a just transition for the economies around the planet, where unemployment is such a critical issue in places like Nigeria and South Africa, where employment rates can be up to 40%. We must find a way to utilize clean energy to bridge the carbon gap and also the employment gap. And this is true off-grid as well. As an off-grid example, when we think about the tiers of services for example, health clinics, we can think about solar portable solutions, so-called tier 1, defined by the World Bank, standalone mini-grid solutions, solar and biomass or microhydro powered kiosks as places to receive everything from small amounts of medical services to vaccines, to regional or municipal mini-grids, to larger clean energy grid systems that enable us to meet many of the sustainable development goals. That's a pro-health, pro-climate, pro-social justice, pro-employment agenda. That's the kind of thing that will turn the story around so that that 2050 decarbonized planet is one where racial and social and gender justice are at the core of the story. And this is not just something we talk about as overseas assistance and projects from the US government or EU or other governments. Here's an example that I am proud to be the co-director of in my town, Oakland, California, where we're working with a low-income community to build the so-called eco-block. This is a block of 38 buildings. Some are single-family homes, some are multi-family homes. You can see there's an apartment building here at the corner where solar is being installed on all the roofs, but not to power each building individually. All of that renewable energy is being pooled in this garage where we have a flywheel, a rotating energy storage system that then sends power back to power all the homes, all the street lights, a waste reclamation system, and critically, publicly available electric vehicle charging stations attached to the lampposts. This is a way to socially build equity and capacity for clean energy and not to make it something where the richest members of the community get there first. There's other efforts. I recently had the pleasure to visit with Fulbright University in Vietnam, and I'm working right now with the Vinh Foundation in Vietnam to look at awarding prizes for the most impressive innovations. We've already seen in the utilities in Vietnam, EVN, the Vietnam Electricity Company, major efforts to increase the numbers of women in the workplace, to make training preferentially available for those who've been excluded in the past, and to really develop a diversified pro-justice energy sector. When we look at the opportunities to do so, one of the ways to do that is to recognize that the way we install new projects, solar, wind, or others, may not be more equitable than technologies we've replaced. In fact, in a recent study in my laboratory, we found that unfortunately new solar projects preferentially go to the ethnic majority, the white population. To provide loans for new startups, to enable minority business people to become the leaders in these fields. If I jump back to industrializing nations, here's a project that we completed 2 years ago in Goma on the eastern edge of the Congo, edge of Lake Victoria, where a community-based clean energy project is one that was financed with social development bonds, something called PRECs, Peace Renewable Energy Credits, something that a group that I helped to found called Energy Peace Partners started. Those PRECs were used to fund this community clean energy project that powers the school on which its land it sits. You can see the solar here and the battery systems at the bottom, and they then provide power to the neighboring community. Pro-job, pro-justice, clean energy in an area where reliable power is rare to find, let alone reliable green power. As we think through the next parts of the energy transition, the so-called rare earth materials, even though there are many different materials, cobalt, graphite, indium, vanadium, nickel, silver, neobendium, a whole variety of materials, the demand for these materials may rise by up to 1,000% by the end of this decade. And the conditions of mining and the exploitation of miners and smelters is horrific in many parts of the world. We need to invest in just materials using blockchain and other technologies to track just materials and to learn from companies like Luna Smelter in Kigali, a company that sources its tin sustainably, and they make then high-grade materials for the export market based on justly harvested materials from artisanal small producers. It's an opportunity to build in a clean transition lens on one of the dirtiest parts of any industry, but certainly the industries to come. I want to thank you for listening. You can contact me both through Twitter if you want to interact with my laboratory. The Twitter feed for my laboratory at UC Berkeley is Dan_Kamen. I've both put the website of my laboratory, and you can also contact me at Power Africa, where again, I'm the senior advisor for energy innovation. I wish you all the best in the conference. I'm looking forward to hearing back from you. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Davids. Thank you very much for this presentation. So we have to correct something to ease the understanding of the two last presentations, the presentation of Mr. Kevin Jabo from Cameroon, and that wasn't translated briefly in French, and I hope that some of you are aware But let me praise the enthusiasm that I can see throughout the chat box. Many of you are sending us very great messages to appreciate the way that we are running this webinar. The interest is shown, so we are also very happy for this gratitude that you are just forwarding to us. And ANYL4PSD is exactly the place to be in this kind of moment, enabling people to share experience across the world and precisely in Africa, and also giving capacity to young Africans to get involved in climate situations and climate issues because it's very important today to handle these issues, because our continent is threatened daily by the climate change manifestations that we testify. So I want to call the help of Joël Ebois to recall the presentation of Kevin Jabo first in French language, briefly, if possible. Then getting to the one of David Kemen, Dr. David Kemen. That was the last intervenant of this webinar. Hello, Joel, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and also David Kemen for this brilliant presentations. Donc, nous disons merci à Kevin Jabo.
Seems that Joel is not on unmute. Can you enable Joel to unmute this mic? Hello?
Hello, are you getting me?
Great. If you can get close to your mic, that would be great.
Okay, so thank you for Kevin Jabo and also to David, Dr. David, for their brilliant presentation. I'm going to make the translation into French. Donc, nous avons eu avant la présentation de Dr. David.
May you be louder, Joel? You are not close from your mic. We are not getting you fine. Please.
Are you getting me?
Yeah, right.
OK, so la présentation de Kevin Jabo a porté sur les solutions basées sur la nature ainsi que les solutions régénératives basées sur la nature. Donc, il est spécialisé dans les questions de biologie et il questionne le rôle de la biologie dans le soutien pour la planète. Donc, il a fait comprendre d'entrée de jeu que le changement climatique est un problème qui est déterminant pour notre époque à ce moment et que nous vivons plusieurs inondations qui sont catastrophiques et les impacts sont réels dans plusieurs communautés. Et il note également que l'Afrique en particulier, par exemple, Madagascar connaît des cyclones et qu'à l'est de l'Afrique, on a plusieurs vagues de sécheresse comme en Somalie, en Afrique du Sud également des inondations. Et avec bonne prévoyance, les bons investissements et la bonne préparation nous permettraient de réduire considérablement l'impact des changements climatiques. Kevin s'est interrogé sur la manière dont nous sommes arrivés là et il a fait comprendre qu'actuellement nous sommes en train de vivre même des maladies zoonotiques, ça veut dire qui sont causées par le fait que l'être humain dégrade la nature et le fait de dégrader la nature, ça cause des maladies zoonotiques tels que les coronavirus. Et également, il relève qu'on a une exploitation forestière abusive et l'exploitation minière également abusive dans plusieurs zones, telles que par exemple la RDC qui est située au bassin du Congo. Et on a également des problèmes d'urbanisation avec la montée accrue des populations qui cause donc une croissance démographique avec des impacts sur la population. Donc, il pense que le monde a perdu 60% de toute la faune sauvage au cours des 50 dernières années, tandis que le nombre de nouvelles maladies infectieuses ne fait que s'accroître. Et donc, si rien ne change, les changements climatiques vont modifier et accélérer les schémas de transmission des maladies infectieuses. Et on aura la perte, on aura également un déclin des espèces en menace dans plusieurs écosystèmes. Les impacts économiques du changement climatique sont dévastateurs et sont perceptibles dans plusieurs lieux. Donc, en tant que responsable de l'Institut du bassin du Congo, il mène plusieurs actions avec son institution qui vise à faire du commerce durable une force positive dans le monde en se concentrant sur l'impact du commerce et de ses biens spécifiques et en recherchant des solutions à ces impacts. Donc, son institution et lui sont donc engagés à améliorer la durabilité de la chaîne d'approvisionnement en produits agricoles, réduisant le besoin d'expansion des terres et la déforestation, et en conservant le carbone forestier, atténuant ainsi les changements climatiques et stabilisant donc le climat au niveau local et régional. Donc, leur objectif également, c'est d'accroître la résilience de l'agriculture et des économies locales nationales, également d'accroître la viabilité des entreprises de produits de base et accroître les avantages de la biodiversité au niveau communautaire. Il a fait mention de certains projets qu'ils implémentent, tels que le projet Ebony, qui est un projet qui s'efforce de répondre à la question « Qu'est-ce qu'un modèle de production et d'exploitation forestière viable et durable ?» Ce projet est implémenté au Cameroun et engage plusieurs populations locales dans ce processus. Dans ce projet, il se concentre sur les questions environnementales, sur les questions de scientifiques, l'économie, la politique et les considérations juridiques. Ils ont également mis en œuvre un projet appelé « Cartographie du trafic du pangolin d'Afrique vers l'Asie ». Dans ce projet qui concerne le pangolin, il faut dire que ce projet est conçu pour recueillir des informations sur les mouvements des pangolins et des écailles du pangolin tout au long de la chaîne de valeur du trafic, c'est-à-dire du braconnage dans la nature à l'accumulation des écailles en passant par des modes de transit, finalement la consommation. Pour ce faire, donc, dans la mise en œuvre de ce projet du pangolin, ils implémentent plusieurs solutions, plusieurs modes, notamment la combinaison de deux approches innovantes, celle donc de Scape Genos, dans la modélisation des réseaux sociaux et pour dresser un tableau complet du trafic du pangolin d'Afrique vers l'Asie. Il a conclu sa présentation en disant qu'il existe des possibilités de s'engager dans la justice climatique et il faudrait que tous les jeunes soient engagés dans la justice climatique. Une planète en bonne santé signifie moins de maladies. Des projets simples peuvent faire la différence. Nous devons veiller à ce que la nature reste sauvage. Ça, c'est ce qu'il demande. Et nous devons travailler à la restauration de l'habitat. Nous devons également nous impliquer toutes les parties prenantes pour construire une économie différente et également durable. Ça, c'était la présentation de Kevin Diabo. Maintenant, nous allons faire un résumé très rapide de la présentation du docteur Daniel Kamen. Donc, le docteur Daniel Kamen, il travaille dans USAID. Donc, ça veut dire que c'est l'agence du gouvernement, du département d'État des Nations Unies qui s'occupe des questions de développement. Et il démontre dans sa présentation que les questions environnementales ont longtemps préoccupé le gouvernement américain et que c'est vrai que dans les différents gouvernements, ça a été d'une manière différente. Dans les gouvernements qui sont plus républicains, on a une différente manière de traiter les questions environnementales. Mais dans tous les cas, l'Amérique, les États-Unis s'intéressent beaucoup à cette question parce que cette question donc est liée à la survie de l'être humain. Et donc, c'est ainsi que dans le cadre de ce programme d'aide au développement, les États-Unis sont engagés à faire la promotion des énergies renouvelables et également à apporter des petites subventions dans plusieurs pays, surtout les pays en développement où vivent les communautés autochtones qui sont plus frappées par les changements climatiques afin de pouvoir contribuer à l'amélioration des conditions de vie des populations. Ces projets donc s'intéressent sont axés la constitution sur plusieurs modèles tels que la constitution des bases de données, des feuilles de route et également l'implication des jeunes, des femmes dans les processus de décision liés au changement climatique et également plus de sensibilisation pour l'égalité. Et ils implémentent également donc des projets de création d'emplois et renforcement des capacités de plusieurs couches sociales et dans la vision 2035. Et plusieurs secteurs qui concernent l'énergie sont mis en exergue. Les questions du pétrole, les questions de gaz naturel, les questions du charbon, les questions également des micro-réseaux pour la constitution des énergies renouvelables. Ce sont les thématiques qui les intéressent beaucoup. Et ils essayent donc de se focaliser sur la capacité de la biomasse, du solaire et du vent à être utilisés comme des sources d'énergie et au travers donc de l'ingénierie. Et donc, dans ce sens, ils implémentent plusieurs programmes qui, par exemple, Fulbright, qui s'intéresse à l'ingénierie et engage les femmes à faire d'elles des modèles d'ingénieurs pour la nature ainsi que pour le climat. Également, donc, leurs projets sont orientés électrification pour la facilité pour la santé humaine. Donc, produire l'électricité pour davantage permettre aux populations d'avoir la santé. Et ces projets sont implémentés dans plusieurs zones donc, qui sont défavorisées, permettant ainsi à plusieurs femmes, par exemple, qui sont enceintes de pouvoir accoucher dans un lieu électrifié. Et donc, il a poursuivi également pour mentionner qu'ils ont une mission, c'est celle d'apporter l'énergie solaire dans toutes les communautés. Et ils collaborent, ils travaillent dans plusieurs pays dans le cadre donc du solaire et de l'énergie renouvelable, tels que RDC, et précisément à Goma, et utilisant ou développant plusieurs matériaux qui permettent d'aider les populations. Voilà un peu réduite le résumé. Voilà le résumé de la présentation du docteur Daniel Kamen. Merci.
Hello? Okay, thank you to everybody. It was such a great pleasure to having all of you gathered in this meeting, guys. We have spent a lot of time together, and despite that time we have spent together, all of you have shown their engagement, their commitment for this fight, the climate justice, the climate change. So we are too much grateful because we think that today, more than ever, we as civil society actors, we are fully aware of the challenges of that threat. And we believe that we are going to to design a customized mechanism to help our government, our community to take action. Je vais donc profiter de ce moment pour remercier encore une fois de plus tous ceux qui ont pu se connecter, tous ceux qui ont activement participé à ce webinaire. Nous voulons vous remercier parce que nous croyons que c'est une preuve, un engagement, un signe de détermination pour pouvoir créer des mécanismes adéquats, des mécanismes personnalisés pour pouvoir aider vos communautés, aider vos gouvernements dans la bataille contre le changement climatique. Bon, mais avant d'aller plus loin dans ma présentation, dans mon dernier mot, j'aimerais introduire un partenaire. Il s'appelle David, de l'université Bad University. C'est un partenaire Bad College, sorry, c'est un partenaire qui nous a beaucoup soutenus dans l'élaboration, dans la mise en œuvre de cet événement. So, before following with my speech, I would like to introduce David. David is one of our partners in the frame of this event. David is from Bad College. So, David, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you in this platform. You are in front of the civil society actor of Africa, and we give you the floor to introduce yourself and to say something about this event. This event that is very relevant for us, Africa, and for the humanity. So, David, over to you.
Patrick, it seems that David is not there since it is.
Okay, it seems that David is not yet ready, but in a couple of minutes, David is going to log in himself. J'aimerais donc justement vous poser une question, vous en tant qu'acteur de la société civile. C'est une question qui ne nécessite pas une réponse présente, mais c'est une question qui peut pousser à davantage de réflexion. En parlant de justice climatique, la question qu'on peut se poser, c'est qu'est-ce que c'est que la justice? Quel est le contenu de la justice? Ce qui est justice pour une communauté peut être justice pour une autre communauté. Comment aborder la question de la justice? C'est très important de réfléchir à ces aspects afin que vous compreniez qu'il est important d'éviter un copier-coller, d'éviter d'importer les actions, d'éviter d'importer les solutions, mais plutôt de développer les solutions au niveau communautaire pour que vous puissiez réellement mettre en œuvre ce qui est pour vous, du point de vue culturel, du point de vue sociologique, une justice climatique. So I was saying that it is important as well for us to think about the concept of justice. We have discussed about the concept of justice, climate justice, but what is justice? It is important to think about it because because the concept of justice may be different from one community to another, from one person to another. It's very, very important to think about it. This will enable us to design customized action based on our cultural and social background. This is very important. And that is why we have created a platform called New Deal for Nature and People Coalition. That platform right now is gather more than 500 CSOs, NGOs. So it is important to express yourself through that platform. Very soon we will come up with a lot of information about it. The information will be displayed very soon in the website. Our website is still in construction. Very soon, that information will be displayed in the website. J'étais donc en train de dire que alors pour mieux jeter les bases d'une justice personnalisée, d'une justice climatique personnalisée et communautaire, il est très important aussi de pouvoir intégrer la plateforme que nous avons créée, que nous appelons le nouveau pacte pour la nature et les personnes. Ce nouveau pacte, c'est une plateforme d'expression des OSC qui présentement rassemble plus de 500 OSC travaillant aussi bien en Afrique que hors de l'Afrique pour qu'ensemble, nous puissions mettre le contenu dans ce que nous appelons justice climatique. Notre justice climatique n'est pas la justice climatique des autres. C'est important que nous puissions le comprendre et pouvoir mettre en place les mécanismes adaptés. J'espère que chacun d'entre vous a écrit proprement son nom sur la liste de présence. I hope that everybody has mentioned his name in the presence sheet. Parce qu'à travers ces listes de présence, nous allons vous délivrer des certificats. Et ces certificats ne sont pas seulement des trophées pour remplir les CV, mais ces certificats sont surtout les appels à action. Appels à action afin de pouvoir dégager les responsabilités personnelles. Parce que toi, en tant que leader, il est de ton devoir de prendre des actions personnalisées pour le bien fondé de ta communauté. So I was saying that after then receiving those certificates, you have then to take action. That certificate is not only a token for your presence, but that certificate is a call of action, to interrogate your accountability towards your community. So, I would like once again to try to know whether David is already online or not. Okay, unfortunately, David is not yet there. On behalf of ANYL4PSD, African Network of Young Leaders for Peace and Sustainable Development, we want to thank you, all of you guys, for your engagement, for your commitment. This webinar is ended, but the battle, the fight is not yet ended. We have to continue to mobilize together through our various channels to keep working toward the sake of our communities. Merci encore une fois de plus pour vos engagements personnels, pour le temps que vous avez alloué pour pouvoir suivre toutes ces interventions de bout en bout. Alors, la bataille n'est pas finie. Le webinaire s'achève, mais la bataille continue. Il est donc maintenant temps que vous puissiez, à travers les différents réseaux sociaux, nos différents canaux de communication, pouvoir interagir afin qu'ensemble, nous puissions relever des défis. Merci beaucoup à toutes et à tous. Et nous vous souhaitons une excellente journée. God bless you. Bye.
At your teach-in, you've discussed concrete actions you can move forward in your community. Time is short for climate injustice. Help others move from climate despair to climate action. As the young people say, now, not next month, not next year. Let's commit today together to create a just and sustainable future for people and planet.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
Obrigada a todos por se tornarem líderes em clima e justiça.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
जलवायु और न्याय पर वर्ल्ड वाइड टीचिंग में आप सभी का स्वागत है।